After a terrifying encounter with a demonic entity in the woods outside of their home, two brothers find themselves under attack by dark and malevolent forces. With no place of refuge from torment, not even their own home, will they escape the wrath of a real-life nightmare they have unearthed, or will the darkness take them? This is the untold story of the demonic Shadow Man case that was experienced by brothers Tom and Tim Yancey. With the majority of my audience not being subscribed, please consider subscribing with notifications on, liking the video, and leaving a comment, as well as checking out one of hundreds of videos available on my channel. Thank you. Lake Worth, Florida, founded in 1913, the city plays home to the arts, boasting festivals, boutiques, music venues, and a historic theater. But amongst the songs, paintings, and acting, it is also the home to something evil that lurks just beneath the surface. In the late 1960s, the Yancey family called Lake Worth their home. Living near the mostly underdeveloped southern woods in the town at that time, brothers Tim and Tom, along with their father Sonny and mother Barbara, up until this point, had lived a rather quiet life. Tim would describe his childhood home as a very peaceful and remote place to live. It was fairly isolated and in the middle of nowhere. His mother Barbara was a beacon of light and joy, a woman who always had a diamond smile upon her face. His father was a stern man, a battle-hardened Korean War veteran, who then worked as a carpenter doing construction. Sonny suffered from PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, as a result of the war, and according to Barbara, was a totally different person when he came back. He had been a sergeant in charge of a mortar platoon during the war, and would very rarely speak of what had happened. Although both of the brothers later would recall that he told them a few different stories of his time there. One story, that following a battle, he had to arrange for mass graves to be dug, and for bulldozers to lay the dead to rest. While suffering with PTSD, Sonny tended to have a short fuse on his temper, but for some reason, this particular summer, it seemed to get inexplicably worse. Where the family lived was remote and surrounded by lush woods, and prior to being settled, the land where the house now stood had been heavily utilized during the slave trade, as well as being the home to numerous bouts of violence between warring Native American tribes. So with the combinations of the terrors of war and those experiencing persecution, over the years, these heavy emotions seemed to leak into the earth, and the woods in and of themselves seemed to become a beacon for darkness, almost as if the black hearts of those who perpetrated the acts still rested beneath the leaves, sticks, and stones of the forest floor. Playing together as brothers often do, Tim and Tom would spend much time within those very same woods, bonding, exploring, and having a great time. Sonny had built a fort for the boys to enhance their time spent out there, and at this time, Tom was 12 years old, and Tim was 7. One chilly fall day, as Tom ventured into the woods alone, as he approached the fort, he began to get an eerie feeling, as if someone or something was watching him. With his inner voice screaming, he bolted and ran inside the fort. As he peered through the openings in between the various boards and peeking past the cloth-covered windows, at first he saw nothing. But as his heart began to subside from beating out of his chest, he began to hear the crunching of crisp autumn leaves around him. And through the darkness of the boards, he sees a silhouette of a creature. Although the figure appears man-like, something tells him that it's not of this world. Tom, doing the sensible thing, runs for his life, leaving the fort behind. Terrified at what he had just experienced, he decides to not tell anyone about what had happened. As Tom ventures back to the house, disturbed by what he had been through, Tim had entered through another path in the woods, blissfully unaware of his brother's plight. As the boy walks the crispy path of dried leaves, he too begins to feel as if he's being watched. Then in front of him, up in a tree, he sees something strange, something out of place. There in the tree, with the environment reacting around it, there appears to be some kind of creature, but this creature is either see-through or it's reflecting its surroundings, almost like a freakish distortion of reality, perhaps something that shouldn't have been within the confines of our reality. As his eyes grow larger with fear, this entity begins to make its way down the tree and then lands in front of him, mere feet away from the boy, hitting the ground with a loud thud. This is enough to truly frighten the young man, and he too, similar to his brother, decides to run for the house, the one place a child should feel safe to be. Tim frantically makes his way out of the woods and quickly into the arms of his mother, who was near the front door of their house. After explaining things as best as he could, Barbara calms him with the love only a mother can provide, asking him to calm down. She tried her best to convince him that it was perhaps an animal that he had startled, and that things would be okay. And although she did what she could, as we'll come to see, this would be far from what would take place. The brothers in due time would discuss the strangeness of their experiences in the woods with one another, confiding in each other, and trying to make sense of just what this thing or what these things were. Fearing that even talking about it could prompt a visit, the boys did their best to move on and shift their focus to other activities, fearing that if they spoke of it, they would invoke the wrath of what they began to call the Shadow Man. During the day, things seemed to regain a small amount of normalcy, but at night, the brothers began to see the very same figure outside, usually near the tree line, presenting a thick, man-like shadow, always watching and lurking like a wild animal stalking its prey. One night, as the moon peeks through the clouds overhead, Tim is jolted awake out of a sound sleep. With his eyes opening and slowly adjusting to the darkness of his room, he tries to make sense as to why he was suddenly woke up. As he glances towards his window, with the faintest amount of moonlight illuminating the room, he sees a shadow go past. Scared, but getting up to investigate, he reluctantly looks, and he sees nothing. Thinking that perhaps his mind is playing tricks on him, Tim lays his head back down to try and sleep again. But as he gets comfortable, right before he closes his eyes, he again sees this menacing shadow pass by his window. Attempting to wake up his brother, but unable to do so, he once again gathers the courage to take a look through the window. Peering around their yard and towards the tree line, there in the mists emanating from the woods, he sees the shadowy outline of a man. And this man appears to be staring directly into his soul from afar. It then suddenly begins to rush towards him. Absolutely petrified with fear, the young man lets out a blood-curdling scream. His brother quickly wakes up, and so do his parents. With Sonny being the first inside the room, he asks just what is happening. After being told by Tim that there was a man in the yard, he quickly grabs a flashlight and begins sweeping the property. He ultimately would find nothing. Several weeks later, as the boys slept in their room, 12-year-old Tom starts acting strangely. Waking up to the sound of footsteps, Tim sees his brother in the middle of their room. As he calls out to him, he receives no response, and Tom then begins to walk and leave their room. Calling out to their parents as well as his brother, Tim continues to follow him as he descends the stairs, headed towards their front door. With Sonny and Barbara rushing close behind him, they watch as Tom heads out of the front door and into the yard. As Tim would describe it later, it was as if he was being called out to something, or there was something drawing him into those woods. It was very frightening for me, because I knew there was something out there, and I didn't understand why this was all happening. Sonny is able to wake the boy up as the four stand in the yard. Tom seemed to have been sleepwalking, unaware of what was taking place. Although this hadn't happened previously, and it was completely new to the family, this incident would be far from the last. For the next several weeks, Tom would continue to sleepwalk. At times, with other members of the family unaware that he was missing, Tom would find himself waking up next to the lake, out in those foreboding woods. To try and keep the boy from sleepwalking, his parents began to implement measures to keep him from leaving the house. Frustrated, and understandably so, having to get up late into the night, what soon became night after night, with Tom often able to maneuver his way out of locked rooms, they took to stacking chairs in front of the boy's room, in hopes that this would prevent Tom from escaping and potentially hurting himself under one of his spells. Later that night, after the family had gone to bed, Tom took to waking up as per usual. As he aimlessly tries to unlock the door to their room, he wakes up Tim. Fearing that his brother would wake up their father, he tries to get him to wake up and realize just what he's doing. And while this is taking place, the closet door directly across the room from Tom begins to shudder, and then it opens by itself. Then, as if he was being controlled like a marionette puppet, Tom would turn around, face the closet, and then walk inside. Then, with the boy inside, the door would shut behind him, once again seemingly by itself, as if it were operated by unseen hands. Tim, scared but also transfixed on what was taking place, began to hear a conversation. He heard his brother speaking, then he heard another voice, a low, gravelly, deep voice. This frightens the young Tim so bad that despite his fear of his father, he calls out to his parents for protection, and thankfully, his parents heed the call. As they rush to push the chairs aside, they finally do, and then throw the door open to find out just what had happened now. Tim, pointing to the closet, indicates that Tom is inside. Heading to the closet door and opening it, they find the boy sat down inside now, apparently awake. Upon asking him just what was going on, all Tom could say was that there was a man in here. In later interviews, Tom would say that he remembers waking up inside the darkness of the closet to the voice of a man, and then upon speaking with him, towards the back of the closet, he saw two red eyes staring back at him. Despite knowing of their son's sleepwalking, his parents tried to argue that he was clearly messing around in the closet, possibly playing with toys, and they then scolded both of the boys for waking them up yet again. In the weeks to come, as their parents grow increasingly angry, the Yancey brothers continue to experience the abyssal force that they have come to refer to as the Shadow Man. One night, the entity seems to find a new way of terrorizing the brothers. Tim has suddenly woken up when he begins to feel small things hit his comforter and mattress. Feeling where the objects had fallen, his hands discover rocks like small pebbles, and thinking it was his brother messing with him, He asked him to stop, and then laid his head back down onto his pillow. And then more of them started falling, pelting the blanket that covered him. He now knows for certain it is not Tom, because he's looking directly at him, and he is fast asleep. As the rocks continue falling onto him, he then discovers leaves, and then pine cones as well. Then he feels something drop onto his head, and this something begins to crawl. Prying off whatever this thing was and throwing it, the boy begins to scream. Barbara soon comes to his aid, and upon turning on the lights, she too finds the stones, pine cones, leaves, and to her surprise, giant Florida cockroaches. It was as if the Shadow Man was bringing in things from the woods, but for what reason remained unclear. It was with this incident that Barbara began to notice that perhaps it wasn't just the boy's imaginations at work. Perhaps there was something terrorizing them. In the weeks that follow this incident, Barbara too begins to notice the ever-growing hostile environment within the home, and soon begins to seek answers from any and all sources. While her husband is at work and her children are at school, she purchases a Ouija board, and upon returning home, places it on the coffee table in the living room. Not being into the occult previously, she doesn't really know what she's doing, but wants to do her best to communicate with whatever could be there, and to try and seek answers as to why it was tormenting her family. She tries to make contact, but doesn't receive any answers. Later that day, the family retires to their beds to catch some sleep. Little did they know of Barbara's attempts to contact the other side, and little did they know that hell was about to be unleashed upon them. As everyone drifts off to dreamland, Tim once again finds himself being woken up out of a dead sleep. Perhaps it was his intuition. It's hard to know for sure why. But as he wakes up and sits up in his bed, he sees a dark hand emerge from the closet in their room. As the familiar fear grips him, he gets up and shakes his brother Tom awake. And to Tom's disbelief, as he looks ahead where his brother is pointing, he too sees the hand. And then a more fuller figure begins to emerge from the closet opening. Before both of their eyes, a shadowy figure emerges, casting itself onto the wall, with glowing red eyes staring at them. It begins to climb horizontally on the wall towards them. With the brothers absolutely shaken to their core, they scream for their parents as the figure dissipates, as if it was never there. The two then rush out of their bedroom and run up to their parents' bedroom. And although apprehensive because of their father, they would rather deal with his wrath than that of the Shadow Man. Doing a knock and then opening their door, Tim leads the boys and calls out to their parents. He tells them that the man was back and that he was on their wall like a fly. This bizarre statement from his son and the continuous lack of sleep prompts Sonny to explode. He tells the boys that there is no man, that they're dealing with the boogeyman, and that the boogeyman does bad things to bad kids, and if they were good, he would simply just go away. With tears in his eyes, Tim and his brother would make their way back to their bedroom. Tim would later recall, this notion that I was a bad kid, that I had done something wrong, and that something had come to punish me for my misdeeds, is something that has stuck with me my entire life. I didn't know what I had done to deserve this. From that point on, the boys keep silent about the nightmare experiences that they had had with the entity known to them as the Shadow Man. But the entity seems to grow ever stronger. But even though they have been silent, The rage that dwells within their father, Sonny, also continues to grow. Tim later again would say, he seemed to not understand what was happening in the house, and this led to a lot of family dysfunction. Whether this attracted whatever this thing was to us, or it fed off of the negative emotions or whatever, there was some kind of connection there. These entities seem to do this, and it's like a coupling. The entity attaches itself to a family and then continues to cause problems and seems to derive energy from this. As time passes, the boys find themselves awake on the night of Christmas Eve. Being rambunctious kids as some of us were, they decided to sneak downstairs to take a peek at some of their Christmas presents under the family tree in the living room. The boys seemed to be successful, not alerting their parents to their sneaky endeavors downstairs, when suddenly, loud booming knocks begin to come from upstairs. Trying to figure out what could be causing it, they realize that they seem to be originating from their room. Downstairs upon their mantel next to the tree, their mother had set up a nativity scene showing Mary, Joseph, and baby Jesus. As the banging intensifies further, the scene begins to shake and move. It then drops to the floor, shattering the porcelain figures. The breaking only adding to the cacophony of sound, now reverberating all throughout the house. Then the heavy footsteps of their father cuts through the noise. As he descends the stairs, the boys are trapped. He is pissed, and then he finds the shattered porcelain figures, and this further enrages him. As he interrogates the boys as to what they could have been doing, the boys deny causing the sounds or breaking the figures, but this too only serves to deepen his rage. Since the boys, quote, wanted to stay up, they could do so outside. Using a scare tactic, he marches the boys outside and into the yard, right near the tree line of the forest. He tells them that he was going to get a good night's sleep, and they were to stay outside all night. Little does he know, he has inadvertently delivered his sons into the arms of perdition. The air is cold and bites at their skin as a large moon hovers above them, and the low rustle of leaves surround them. The two young men, despite their best efforts to comfort one another, are absolutely paralyzed with fear as they stand in the darkness of the night. They both suddenly hear the crunching of leaves from behind them. Upon turning around, they are besieged by the Shadow Man yet again. Screaming for their mother as they run up to their deck, they beg to be let back into the house. Finally, their mother is woke up and forces their father to come with her and let the boys back in, finding the punishment to be cruel, especially since she knows herself that there are things at work that none of them understand. Tim would later say this when interviewed: "My father's anger continued to grow, and he became increasingly frustrated. He would blame the noises on us, and his punishments were severe. The goal of this monster seemed to be to create more anger, more chaos, and more depression within our family." The situation grew bleaker day after day, and on a cold and stormy night, as Tim laid in his bed, he was all too familiarly woken up, without warning. This time, however, something was different. His sheets and blankets were pulled from him. And as Tim would later say, "You know something's there. It's in the room with you, and you've got to reach down and pull those sheets back up." The boy reaches down to do just that, peering down as he grabs them off the floor. He thankfully doesn't see anything. Pulling them back over himself, now laying back down, he once again tries to get comfortable to sleep. As he starts to drift off, he then feels a sharp, searing pain on the right side of his ribs. Feeling this pain, his eyes pop open to find what appears to be a long, bony hand coming from underneath his sheets. Scared for his life, the boy screeches and runs as fast as his legs will carry him. But being this scared, he had his blinders on because he ran directly into the door that was locked to try and prevent his brother from sleepwalking and ultimately leaving the house. He smacks into the door with a visceral crack, screaming in pain and crashing to the ground. This prompted the attention of his parents, who came into the room to discover their son writhing in agony. They would quickly rush him to the hospital, and it would turn out that Tim had broken both of his collarbones. Following this event, as the months turned to years, things from here did not get any better for the Yancey family. Tom, being the oldest, when he became old enough, left the house as quickly as he could, no longer able to deal with the dark forces that dwelled there. Tim, Sonny, and Barbara would not see him for years. Details past this point are practically non-existent, but I will do my best to bring a conclusion to this very haunting case based on what I could find. Over the next 30 years, Tom would play college football and then become a career firefighter. Tim, given all the experiences he experienced before and after his brother left, would become a paranormal investigator and a park ranger. Drifting apart as people do, they wouldn't reconnect until after their parents were gone. Sonny and Barbara had continued to live at the same house the two had grown up in and had had all of their Shadow Man experiences. When the brothers inherited the house, they came back together to decide just what to do with it. Tom, who had done practically everything to never return to the house, would later recall that he had a sickening feeling in the pit of his stomach upon entering the house again, saying that it was just an evil, sickening feeling. As the brothers discussed things, it would become apparent that Tim wanted to move back into the home with his wife and reclaim it. So after working out a deal amongst themselves, that's exactly what Tim did. And by moving back in, he intended to cleanse the home, to rid themselves once and for all of this ominous presence that had caused them so much pain, the entity they knew as the Shadow Man. Prior to moving in, Tim would reach out to his friend Roy Hall, who had dealt with violent hauntings for many years, to help him perform a cleansing ritual of the home. Roy believed that the entity was demonic in nature and haunted the family because Tim's father was abusive. Sonny, who was a Korean War veteran, probably saw a good amount of the horrors of war. He believed that because of Sonny's PTSD, that perhaps the entity had been attached to the land and had seen this and exploited these problems as an entry into their lives, where it continued to wreak havoc upon all of them. As Roy would say in later interviews, these entities seek to cause further dysfunction. They feed upon it. The two men on a rainy and dreary afternoon would step into the home together. Roy would begin to pick up on the ominous, thick atmosphere almost immediately. Lighting incense and beginning various prayers, the two men go from room to room, cleansing. As they walk throughout the house, they sense that the presence is strongest in Tim and Tom's old room, calling out to God to cleanse the house of all evil and negativity. The process took about an hour, but following it, the energy in the house seemed to be rid once and for all of the Shadow Man. Tim recalled that things felt different. They felt much lighter, as if we had displaced the negative energy within the home. In August of 2009, Tim, his wife Trish, and son Gabriel all moved into the Lakewood, Florida home. Although they never experienced anything to the degree the boys did while growing up within it, there still seemed to be an undercurrent of evil just right below the surface. In closing, It is believed that the dysfunction of the Yancey household was more than likely far worse than what the sons portrayed publicly, but to what extent, I'm not sure. I did my best to dig as deep as I could, and I believe Tim and Tom are both still alive, with Tim still being a consultant to various paranormal groups across the country. I did want to say that their story was a terrifying and a harrowing one, and although somewhat anticlimactic in the end, as we know here on this channel, things don't always work out the way we want them to, and cases don't always have some kind of ultimate showdown. But a few questions I was left with after researching this case were, just what was the Shadow Man? Was it a demon? Did it exploit the vulnerabilities of the family, particularly Sonny, in order to create a feedback loop of negativity in which it could enrich itself with? And although from the outside looking in, those that are still with us who were involved seem to be doing okay, but just how has surviving the haunting affected these two men on a daily basis? Do they still think about it, as I occasionally do with my own experiences? All questions I may never have answers for, but one thing is certain. There was something evil that stalked the woodlands surrounding the Yancey home. Something stalking like a predator, seeking prey. And although things seem to be dormant for now, these malevolent entities may still be watching and lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the moment to strike. Don't let their victim be you. Thank you guys so much for watching this new video. Please let me know what you thought down in the comments below, and if you have any particular cases that you'd like me to research and cover, let me know. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe with notifications on, and consider checking out the YouTube membership program and/or supporting me on Patreon. Or if you'd prefer to have something cool and in your hands and want to help support the channel as well, consider purchasing my book, Stories from the Archives Volume 1, from either my Shopify store or Amazon. Other than that, guys, numbers are still down, but we are very slowly but surely on the way back up as far as I can tell. So to everyone who has supported me and the channel and has been regularly watching, interacting, and sharing, thank you guys so much. You're all the best. Anyways, guys, new and limited merchandise will be coming your way very soon, and I appreciate each and every one of you. This has been Cody here at Mystery Archives. Remember to please stay safe out there, and take care. I'll see you next time. In the lush mountains of Taiwan, beneath the constant veil of mist and rain, a beautiful mansion promised comfort and prestige to an American family starting a new chapter abroad. But behind its glass walls and marble floors, something ancient was waiting. They were not alone. What began as whispers in the night soon grew into footsteps, voices calling from the dark, and finally, violent attacks no skeptic could dismiss. The bishops had unknowingly stepped into a battlefield between the living and the restless dead. Spirits starved of offerings, bound by tragedy, and hungry for the energy of the living. This is their story, true, terrifying, and unforgettable. In the humid nights of Taiwan, when the summer rains swell rivers and mist coils through the valleys, there is a month that no family dares to ignore. Lanterns glow at doorways, incense smolders on sidewalks, and baskets of food are left on stoops, not for the living, but for the dead. This is Ghost Month, the time when the gates of the underworld are said to open, releasing the restless and the hungry into the world of men. In Chinese belief, these are not the honored ancestors who receive reverent offerings at family altars. These are the forgotten dead, the souls of those who perished violently or without descendants to honor them. They wander, gaunt and hollow, tormented by insatiable appetites that rice, wine, and paper money can only briefly ease. They are known as the Uruguay, the hungry ghosts. To neglect them is to invite disaster. Fires start without cause. Illness takes root. Misfortune stalks a household until it buckles under the weight of unseen company. So each August, families appease the hungry dead with careful rituals. The living light the path of the forgotten, hoping that food and flame will buy peace for another year. But what of those places where violence left a scar so deep the earth itself refuses to forget? What of homes raised on soil blackened by tragedy, where spirits were never guided onward, never offered release? It was in such a valley that the Bishop family would come to live. An American father, his wife, and 2 daughters, strangers to Taiwan's ancient customs, arrived with optimism and curiosity. They believed the house they were given was a gift, a token of success. They could not know that it was already claimed by others, souls that had not left, and perhaps would never leave without taking something in return. The bishops would learn, as countless Taiwanese had whispered for centuries, that the hungry dead do not sleep. They linger, waiting for the living to feed them. And in the mountains outside Taipei, in a mansion gleaming with glass and marble, those spirits had waited long enough. The year was 1984, and opportunity had knocked for Dennis Bishop. After years of grinding the corporate ladder, he had finally been promoted to a senior position with his company, a posting that would take him and his family halfway across the world to Taipei, Taiwan. To Dennis, it was a dream. To Candace, his wife, it was a step into the unknown. For their daughters, Stacy, who was 16 at the time, and Marissa, who was just 12, it was an adventure waiting to unfold. The company spared no expense. A driver was provided, as well as housing befitting Dennis's new stature as a CEO. The Bishops, accustomed to modest suburban living in the States, were stunned when they were taken to see the house that would become their home. It sat at the base of the mist-draped Yangming Mountains, massive and imposing, far from the bustle of Taipei's crowded streets. The road curved past rice paddies, scattered cemeteries, and the ruins of farms, until the driver slowed before the gates. Beyond them, the mansion rose like a fortress, its large windows reflecting the gray sky. For Marissa, it was breathtaking, the biggest house I'd ever seen, she whispered, her eyes sparkling with excitement. After years of cramped apartments, here was a palace, complete with a swimming pool shimmering in the humid air. She imagined running through its endless rooms, swimming until dusk, and playing in the gardens that seemed to stretch forever. Stacy, ever the skeptic, wasn't so easily charmed. She looked up at the upper windows, at the way that the mist pooled along the roofline. The house loomed too heavily, she thought, as though the mountain itself pressed down upon it. Something about it unsettled her. And Candace's unease was immediate. As the front door was opened and the family stepped inside, A heaviness settled on her chest. The air felt different, colder, though outside the heat was oppressive. She trailed her fingers along the wall as she moved through the entryway. And that was when it struck. An unseen fist, sudden and violent, slammed into her back. She stumbled forward, catching herself against a column, her breath ragged. Dennis turned around, alarmed. Stacy froze. Marissa giggled nervously, thinking that maybe her mom had tripped. But Candace knew better. She hadn't tripped. Something had shoved her. She turned, eyes wide, but no one stood behind her. The cavernous foyer was empty. Her skin prickled. She forced a smile for her two daughters, not wanting to frighten them. The company representative talked about all of the amenities of the property, about its prestige, and how lucky the Bishops were to have it. But Candace's mind was elsewhere. It kept replaying that moment over and over again. The blow, the cold, the feeling of being watched the instant she crossed the threshold. For 2 weeks, she begged Dennis to reconsider. They toured other homes, and those homes were smaller, more humble, but were tucked in crowded neighborhoods. Nothing seemed to compare to the mansion. Nothing impressed Dennis the way the estate did. He saw in it success, stability, and a future for his family abroad. Candace, however, only saw shadows. In the end, her protests were drowned out by reason and responsibility. With Dennis's career on the line, she relented. They would move into the mansion. She told herself she would find a way to make it work. Yet even as boxes were carried in, even as Marissa danced through the hallways, Candace felt the mansion looming around her. The Bishops believed they were settling into a home, but in truth, they had crossed into a domain that did not belong to them. The first weeks in the mansion were filled with contradictions, opulence and unease, beauty and menace. To Marissa, the place was enchanted. She wandered its halls with awe, exploring room after room as though she had stumbled into a fairy tale palace. She swam in the pool until her fingertips wrinkled, delighted to finally have space to breathe and play. But to Candace, every corner whispered discomfort. The jungle pressed close to the estate. Humidity clung to every surface. Vines crawled along the outer walls. And each night, the air rang with the buzz of cicadas and the calls of unseen creatures. The house seemed less a sanctuary than a fortress, standing against a wilderness that wanted to creep back in. It was during one of those early evenings, while the family unpacked, that the jungle showed its teeth. Stacy's scream rang down the staircase. Dennis and Candace rushed upward, only to freeze at the sight of a giant spider. Its body thick and black. It clung to the wall near Stacy's door. Its long legs twitched as it crept slowly and deliberately. Marissa shrieked and leapt onto a chair. Dennis cursed under his breath, and Candace's skin crawled as her chest tightened. Their driver, Achan, hurried in wielding a shovel. With one brutal strike, he smashed the creature, and its body crumpled to the floor. He stood over the remains, his expression grim. "These spiders," he said softly, "they go in pairs. So if you kill one, the other is always nearby. Candace felt a chill race down her spine. She found herself glancing toward the shadowed corners of the hallway, half expecting to see another set of legs scuttling towards them. That night, she lay awake, imagining the mate spider creeping silently into a bedroom. But pests were not the mansion's only gift. The rains came heavy, as they did in Taiwan's monsoon season. Water streamed down the mountainside and into the house itself. The walls began to drip, and in the bedrooms, streaks of moisture traced downward like tears, soaking carpets. Candace wrapped towels around the bases of the doors to hold the water back, but the mansion seemed determined to drown itself. Then came the electricity. At first, it was little shocks, light switches that snapped with static when touched. Then it grew worse. A flick of a switch sent painful jolts through fingertips, strong enough to leave Candace afraid of the lights themselves. She kept lamps unplugged and would sit with her daughters in the dark. Yet despite this, the power bills rose inexplicably, far beyond what they could explain with normal use. Dennis grew frustrated, convinced the family was careless with the electricity. Candace argued back, furiously. The house was draining them in ways that he couldn't or wouldn't see. And still, stranger things crept in. Late at night, Stacy swore she heard footsteps in her room, soft and deliberate, as though someone circled her bed in the dark. She pulled her covers tighter, her heart pounding, too afraid to cry out. Candace too felt it, the faint whisper of her name in an empty hall, the flicker of a light at the edge of her vision. She told herself it was exhaustion, stress, the strangeness of life abroad. But deep down, she knew she was being watched. The house, it seemed, had opened its eyes. Night fell differently in the mansion. The jungle pressed against the walls, the screaming of cicadas giving way to stillness that made every creak echo louder than it should. It was in this silence that the first true whispers began. Marissa noticed less, at least at first. She still tried to find wonder in the house, though even she began to ask strange questions. One evening, she peered out a window toward the dark yard and asked her sister, "Is A-Chan here?" referring to their driver. But the yard was empty. There was no footsteps in the gravel, no sign of anyone. Stacy shivered at the question. The mansion was vast, but it never truly felt empty. It was as though the family had become guests in their own home, moving through rooms that belonged to someone or something else. Candace's instincts screamed that something was wrong. She began to listen more carefully at night, to pause when the air shifted as though someone unseen had passed by. She didn't tell Dennis. He was already frustrated with the leaking roof, the electrical shocks, and the constant bills. To him, these were solvable problems. To her, they were symptoms of something far deeper, something alive in the walls. But for the sake of her daughters, she kept her fear tucked away. She smiled when she needed to, laughed when Marissa showed excitement. Yet each time she closed her eyes at night, she felt it, the weight of unseen eyes staring at her from the darkness. And in silence, the house grew bolder. For weeks, Stacy had grown accustomed to hiding her fear. She heard footsteps that had no source, whispers that carried her name through the dark, but she kept it all inside. She told herself that it was stress or imagination, and if she spoke, she feared she'd sound crazy. Her solace was Thomas. 16 like her, he was a local boy with an easy smile. He offered an escape from the mansion's suffocating atmosphere. Whenever she could, she spent evenings at his home, laughing, listening to music, and forgetting the dread that seemed to hang like smoke over her family's new life. It was on one such evening, after Thomas dropped her off at the gate, that the house revealed itself. The night was humid, the jungle thick with the sounds of frogs. Thomas waited at the end of the driveway as Stacy slipped inside. He glanced back at the looming structure, its dark windows glinting faintly under the pale moon, and then he froze. At the top floor, a light flickered to life. Behind the glass, a woman's silhouette stood, her hair long, her figure motionless. She looked out into the night. To Thomas, she looked exactly like Candace Bishop. Alarmed jolted through him. Something about her stillness, the way she stood in the shadow, it was wrong. He started the car, then hesitated. A cold dread whispered through him. What if she's in trouble? After rushing home, he quickly grabbed his family's phone and called Stacy. Stacy answered, surprised. "Stacy," he said quickly, with his voice shaking. "Go check on your mom, please, right now. Just please, I saw her upstairs at the window, and she didn't look right," he said. Stacy's stomach dropped. With her heart pounding, she raced through the mansion's halls, calling out for her mother. Marissa, alarmed, followed and became frightened as well. Their voices echoed off marble and tile, became increasingly desperate and urgent. Room after room lay empty. No movement, no sign of her. The house seemed to swallow their cries, as though mocking their search. Finally, a door opened, and Candace stepped out of the master bedroom, startled by the commotion. She looked perfectly fine. Stacy stopped dead, her breath catching. Thomas's sighting replayed in her head. Her mother's figure standing upstairs in the window, watching, when she had been here all along. The realization washed over her like ice water. It hadn't been her mother. It had been something else. That night, the fragile silence between mother and daughter cracked. Trembling, Stacy confessed. The footsteps, the voices, the nights she felt something circling her in the dark. Candace's eyes widened, tears forming as she admitted the same, that she too had heard whispers, seen flickers of light, and felt the eyes of something unseen. They sat together in the heavy stillness, clinging to one another, no longer able to deny it. The house was haunted. The night after Thomas's sighting, silence weighed heavy on the house. Candace could feel it in her bones. The walls were watching them. The air was listening. The admission she and Stacy had shared only sharpened the tension. They were no longer keeping secrets. Now they knew they weren't alone. But knowing did not bring peace. It brought fear. Stacy drifted uneasily into sleep, her mind tangled with dread. In her dream, the mansion's corridors stretched endlessly, their walls slick with rainwater. She wandered, crying out for her mother, and the air smelled of smoke. Then she saw her. Candace was standing in the kitchen, her face pale and hollow. In her hands, a butcher's knife gleamed. Her eyes flicked upward, not her usual gentle gaze, but something feral, driven mad by terror. Without warning, Candace raised the blade, and Stacy's heart froze. She tried to scream, but no sound left her mouth. The nightmare shifted in jerks and flashes. Her mother was stalking her through the halls, knife in hand. Her father was crumpled in a corner. Marissa screamed as Candace's shadow loomed. Stacy then woke with a jolt, her body slick with sweat. The image of her mother holding the knife clung in her mind like a stain. She sat up, trembling, realizing that the dream had not been random. It had been a warning, a premonition of what the house could drive them to. While Stacy was tormented by dreams, Candace waged her own battle against the dark. With Dennis away on a business trip, the weight of protection fell solely on her. Every night, she gathered her daughters into the master bedroom. They slept together in one bed. The girls pressed close, while Candace kept her eyes open, listening to the house. She had placed a butcher's knife and a baseball bat under the mattress. If the spirits came, if anything tried to touch her children, she would fight. The hours crawled. Shadows stretched and moved across the walls, twisting with each flicker of the storm outside. Sometimes she swore she heard someone standing just outside the door. Other times, Stacy would bolt upright, certain that she had heard the handle rattle. Candace would grip the knife, her pulse hammering, ready to face whatever entered. But nothing came. At least, not yet. Returning from work, Dennis found his wife strung thin, his daughters pale and restless, their eyes rimmed with sleepiness. He listened but struggled to reconcile their terror with his own rationality. "What do I tell my boss?" he snapped. "That we have to leave because the house is haunted?" Candace pleaded for him to understand. Stacy begged him to believe. Even Marissa, usually innocent and carefree, grew quiet and uneasy. The mansion had become a battleground, not just between the bishops and whatever haunted them, but between their instincts and Dennis's disbelief. And in that rift, the house thrived. It seemed to feed on fear and on doubt, on the slow erosion of their strength. For Stacy, the nightmare would not leave her. Each time her mother reached for the knife at night, keeping watch with trembling hands, Stacy saw again the image of blood and madness. The house wasn't only haunting them, it was turning them against themselves. The Bishop family had come to Taiwan full of hope, but now the mansion was unraveling them, thread by thread. The Bishop home had become a pressure cooker of fear. Every shadow seemed heavier, every silence more oppressive. Candace did her best to keep her daughters close, to shield them from what she could no longer deny. But the house was patient. It was waiting for the moment when one of them was most vulnerable. And that moment came for Marissa. It was evening. Rain tapped against the wide windows, and the jungle outside buzzed faintly in the humid dark. Stacy was away with Thomas, and Candace had agreed to accompany Dennis to visit a neighbor's house down the road. It would be just for a little while. Marissa nodded when her mother asked if she'd be all right. But as the front door closed behind them, the mansion seemed to exhale. The vast hall stretched around her, too quiet and too still. She turned on the television to chase away the silence, but the sound only made the emptiness more noticeable. Shadows gathered in the corners of the room, deepening with each passing minute. Then came a sound. A door creaking open somewhere upstairs. Marissa's heart stuttered. She glanced towards the staircase, its banister vanishing into darkness. She called out to her parents, asking if they had forgotten something, her voice trembling. But there was no answer, only the hollow echo of her own words. Then footsteps came, measured and heavy, descending the stairs. The young girl backed away, clutching the edge of the sofa, calling out again to see if it was her parents. The living room door swung open with a sudden force. A cold rush of air swept in, carrying with it the unmistakable presence of someone or something unseen. And then it was upon her. Invisible hands shoved her backwards. She gasped, stumbling to the floor. But it didn't stop there. Something pressed against her chest, heavier, stronger, until she couldn't breathe. Her body convulsed, as if this something was trying to force its way into her. Terror swallowed her. She felt her limbs go weak. Her mind pulled into a darkness that was not her own. Whispers clawed at the edges of her thoughts. Hungry, desperate, and human. For a heartbeat, she wasn't herself. She was them. And then silence. Marissa collapsed onto the floor, trembling, covered in sweat. And the house loomed above her, silent once more, as though satisfied. When Candace and Dennis returned, they found their daughter sprawled on the floor. Candace dropped to her knees, scooping Marissa into her arms, asking, "Baby, what happened? What's wrong?" Marissa's eyes darted around, wild and glassy. Her voice was hoarse. "Someone came in and pushed me." She broke into sobs, clinging to her mother. Dennis's face drained of color. He had doubted, rationalized, resisted in every suggestion that something unnatural plagued their home. But this was different. His daughter's trembling, the sheer panic in her voice. It could not be dismissed. That night, the family huddled together in terror, with every light in the house blazing. Candace sat upright with the knife in her lap, too afraid to close her eyes. Marissa lay against her, shivering, whispering again and again that something had been inside her. By morning, she seemed eerily calm. She insisted that she felt fine, brushing off her mother's worried questions. She said, I don't want to worry or think about it anymore, seeming detached. But Candace knew better. Something had touched her daughter, and this was something that could not be undone. The attack on Marissa left no more room for denial for Dennis. Once the firm skeptic, he could not shake the image of his daughter trembling on the floor, insisting that something had entered her. A foreign entity, something not of this world. Candace's fear had now become his own. The house was not simply strange, it was dangerous. Candace reached out to a friend, Bob Patton, an American journalist in Taipei, with connections deep into Taiwan's spiritual circles. If anyone could point them to help, it was Bob. And he did. He told Candace of a respected Taoist priest a man experienced in dealing with restless spirits, a man he himself had interviewed years before. When the priest arrived at the bishop home, he carried himself with quiet authority. He was elderly, robed simply, with eyes that seemed to pierce through stone. From the moment he crossed the threshold, his demeanor darkened. He moved slowly through each room, pausing as if listening to something that the others could not hear. Finally, he gathered the family, and his words came measured, deliberate. "This house," he said, through Bob's translation, "has very dangerous feng shui. No Chinese architect would design it this way unless he wished to curse the inhabitants." Dennis frowned. Still unused to the concept, he asked, "What do you mean?" The priest gestured towards the open windows, the dripping walls, the unnatural damp that seemed to ooze from every corner. "The mountain's water and wind bring energy, but this house does not flow with it. It traps it. It feeds yin, the negative energy. It strengthens the dead." Candace shuddered, remembering the priest's choice words. "It's been designed to kill." Then came the most chilling revelation. The priest closed his eyes, breathing deeply. When he spoke again, his voice was heavier. "There are two spirits here, and they're hungry. A man and a woman." Candace gasped. Her mind leapt to the apparition Thomas had seen in the upstairs window. She turned to their driver, who had lived in the valley his entire life. "Do you know what was here before this house was built?" she asked. Achan hesitated, and his face tightened, as though even speaking of it was dangerous. At last he said quietly, "A pig farm. It burned, and the farmer and his wife were trapped. They died in the fire." The words clung heavy in the air. Candace's heart sank. The flickering lights, the voices calling names, the woman at the window, all of it pointed to those lost souls. They had not moved on. They had remained, hungry, angry, seemingly tethered to the land where they had perished. The priest's face was grim. "Hungry ghosts," he said. "They do not have what they need in the afterlife. Food, money, or offerings. So they take energy from the living. They feed off of fear, particularly from your daughter." Marissa's face was pale, with tears brimming in her eyes. The family drew closer together, with fear thick between all of them. The priest rose. He said, "I'll help you, but you must understand. What is bound here is strong. I will need some time to prepare, and even if I succeed, it will not last. And if you remain, they will return." His warning was clear. The house was not a home. It was a trap, built on ashes, feeding the dead. For the bishops, the nightmare had finally been given a name. The night of the ritual arrived heavy with anticipation. The bishops had spent the day in uneasy silence, waiting. Marissa had been sent to stay with neighbors. The priest would not risk her presence. The hungry ghosts had already singled her out once. If they were provoked again, she might not survive. Inside the mansion, the air felt charged, as though the house itself knew what was coming. The Taoist priest returned at dusk, robed simply, carrying a bundle of tools, incense sticks, joss paper folded into stacks of money, a basket of fruit. He instructed Dennis to open every door and window in the house. "The spirits must have a way out," he said. As the last window was unlatched, a strange wind moved through the house. Though the air outside was still, curtains billowed, and Candace clutched Stacy's hand. The priest lit incense, smoke curling upward into thin white trails. He began to chant, his voice low and rhythmic, filling the halls with words the family could not understand, yet they felt their meaning deep in their bones. Almost immediately, the house seemed to react. A pressure settled on the family, heavy and suffocating. Candace later recalled, "It was a force that shook our clothes and our hair. Everything was moving, and it became hard to breathe." Lights flickered violently. Upstairs, a door slammed shut with a deafening crack. The air was alive with unseen motion, as though invisible figures were rushing past, enraged by the intrusion. Despite this, the priest did not falter. He raised his voice, commanding, demanding, calling upon heavenly forces to guide the spirits to peace. Then he turned to Stacy. In his hands was the basket of offerings: oranges, rice, bundles of paper money, all burning slowly with incense smoke. "You," he said firmly, "you must take this to the back, to the graves." Terror gripped her. Her legs trembled. She didn't want to go. The priest's eyes locked on hers, and he told her, "You must. Be brave. They will follow you, but they must be fed." Her mother's hand squeezed hers. Her father's nod was solemn. With a sob, Stacy lifted the basket. The smoke curled into her face, stinging her eyes. She then stepped into the night. The backyard was darker than she had ever seen it. The trees loomed beyond the walls, and every step felt watched. She carried the basket toward the patch of earth the priest had identified, the place where the farmer and his wife had died. Her arms ached. Her skin prickled as though someone walked just behind her. She fought the urge to run. At the edge of the yard, she set the basket down and whispered through her tears, "Take this, please, and leave us alone." For a moment, the air stilled, and then, as if in answer, the night swallowed the offering. Inside, the priest moved room to room, sprinkling holy water, chanting at each corner, and each time he entered, the lights would die, slowly flickering back on, only as he finished his incantations. Candace and Dennis followed, their hearts pounding. They could feel it, the shift, the weakening of the presence that had plagued them. The chanting rose to a crescendo, smoke thick in the halls, as a final prayer echoed through the house. And then, silence. The wind ceased. The walls no longer seemed to hum. And for the first time in months, since they had arrived, the house felt still. Before leaving, the priest produced a talisman, a mirror etched with the symbols of the I Ching. He fixed it above the door, firmly patting it into place. "This will keep harmony here," he said, "but only for a short time." His eyes were grave. "The hungry ghosts are appeased, but only for 2, maybe 3 months. And after that, they will return. You must leave this house, or a great tragedy will come." The warning settled deep into their hearts. The house was calm now. The danger, however, was far from gone. The house stood unnaturally quiet in the aftermath of the ritual. For the first time in months, the oppressive weight had lifted. The walls no longer groaned. The air no longer pressed down on their lungs. Candace wept with relief. Dennis, exhausted, finally allowed himself to believe that what had tormented his family was real. He had fought against his beliefs, against fear, clinging to reason and responsibility. But now there was no argument left. He had seen too much. He knew the priest was right. In the days that followed, the mansion remained eerily still. Nights passed without footsteps, without whispers. Stacy slept without hearing her name being called. Candace no longer felt eyes burning into her back. And even Marissa, who had returned from the neighbors, seemed lighter, free of the strange detachment that had followed her from the attack. The Bogway mirror gleamed above the front door, a silent sentinel. The family lived in its shadow, aware that the peace was only borrowed time. Candace began to plan. She marked the months carefully, watching the calendar as though it were a countdown to doom. Stacy would finish her schooling by June, and by then, they would be gone. Dennis made quiet inquiries about transfers, careful not to draw suspicion from his superiors. Every decision was guided by the priest's warning, before the hungry ghosts would return. It was not an easy choice. Dennis's career had brought them here, had promised them prosperity, but what was a promotion compared to the safety of his family? Stacy finished her final term of school that June, and her relief mirrored her mother's. Dennis arranged their departure with quiet urgency. When the time came, the family packed their belongings into crates, and the rooms were emptied, one by one. On their last morning in the house, the air was unnervingly still. The jungle outside shimmered in the heat, and for once, no storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Candace stood at the front door, staring at the Bogway mirror fixed above it. The talisman glinted faintly in the light. For months, it had kept the house calm, but she knew its power would soon wane. As she turned to leave, she glanced up at the second-floor window, the same place Thomas had once seen a figure standing. And for the briefest moment, she thought she saw something. The outline of a woman, her face hidden in the shadows. But a blink later, the window was empty. Candace shivered. She would not look back again. The bishops left Taiwan behind, returning to the United States with more than just suitcases. They carried with them the memory of the mansion, the unseen blows, the whispers from the darkness. In the night, Marissa collapsed on the floor, seemingly invaded by something malicious. In interviews years later, Candace admitted that the experience had shattered the boundaries of her world. "I had learned that there are powers that we don't understand," she said. "Energies, spirits, things that can touch our lives in ways that you can't imagine unless it happens to you." The family never returned to that valley. They never sought the mansion again. Whether the house still stands, whether others live there unaware, no one can say. But in Taiwan, where the Hungry Ghost Festival still burns bright each summer, the belief endures. the dead remain among us, if not given rest. And in the shadow of the Yangming Mountain, where fire once consumed a farmer and his wife, where a foreign family came seeking a home and only found terror, the hungry ghosts still linger, waiting for the living to feed them. So it took some digging, but I was able to figure out what the bishops are up to these days. I haven't seen or come across any updates on them from other creators, so I decided to try and find out for myself, and to my surprise, I did indeed discover the details. The bishop's case was made famous by the TV show A Haunting, which is one of my all-time favorites. Their episode was amply titled Hungry Ghosts. My version is essentially a retelling of their harrowing case with additional details that I could find. With that being said, what are the bishops up to these days? Well, I'm going to tell you, but I will omit some details as to respect their privacy. It seems like Dennis and Candace are no longer married. I'm not sure what happened to Candace, but I hope wherever she is, that she's doing well. Dennis has since remarried and is a COO of a major global company, albeit I'm not sure if it's the same company that he worked for during the family's experiences, but he continues to work abroad in Asia and other parts of the world, and him and his wife seem to have adopted a son. Everyone, from what I can tell, has moved on and returned to a sense of normalcy and seems to be happy and prosperous. I truly hope that is the case, and I don't know about you, but I love a happy ending. With me providing those details, again, please respect the bishop's privacy, and that goes for anyone whose cases I've covered here. Be kind and be respectful, and please don't bother anybody. Thank you guys so much for watching this new episode. I took a bit of a different writing approach with this one, but I hope that you still liked it. And if you did, please leave the episode a like. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and subscribe if you're new here. All those things help me out a ton on the platform. You can also watch all my content ad-free by becoming a channel member by clicking Join Now here on YouTube, or you can become a patron by visiting patreon.com/mysteryarchives. If you'd like to check out my books, which each contain 10 real and haunting paranormal cases, including my own story, then please visit mysteryarchives.myshopify.com, or you can buy them on Amazon. Other than that, guys, I truly appreciate you all and your continued support to allow me to do what I do. I, as always, could not be more proud of how amazing this community has become and continues to be. I hope you all are doing well mentally, physically, and spiritually. And I'll see you soon with another brand new episode. This has been Cody here at Mystery Archives. Remember to stay safe out there from hungry ghosts and other specters that may haunt the night. And take care. I'll see you next time. Imaginary friends are generally considered to be a normal part of childhood development for some. But what would you do if your child's imaginary friend turned out to be much more than just imagination? When a woman notices that her son is speaking with a friend who she thinks doesn't exist, she dismisses it at first. However, this so-called friend would turn out to be anything but, as an abhorrent force turns their lives upside down. Will they escape with their souls intact, or will the entity consume them? I will warn you, as with many cases I've covered on this channel, to not watch this alone or in the dark unless you like a challenge, because this case is certainly no exception. Kentucky, a bastion of American beauty, wild and free on the surface, also harbors darkness. Home to the Mammoth Cave System, known to be the longest in the world. One can truly get lost inside its winding caverns and crevices. Kentucky contains many tales of legends, folklore, and hauntings, with caves older than bone beneath it, and numerous battles fought on its surface, among other happenings. It's no surprise that this southern state holds such secrets. Our story begins in western Kentucky with the Foster family, Jan, Dale, their 5-year-old son Cody, and 16-year-old daughter Pamela. Jan is a carrier for the U.S. Postal Service, and Dale is a contractor. Up until this point, the Fosters have been a relatively normal American family, but this would soon change. A nanny often stays with their son while the two parents work during the day, and tends to leave when one of the parents gets home from work for the day. One evening, the nanny asks for a word with Jan, with the two stepping off into the hallway for a more private word together. The nanny tells her that Cody has been using some very bad language, and that she's concerned about his behavior. Jan is shocked to hear this because they've always considered themselves a fairly strict family on what can and can't be said in their house, so she's not sure where the boy would have heard such language. Alongside the curse words, Cody has been incredibly defiant, extremely rude, and angry towards the nanny. He has also been speaking with someone who isn't there. After assuring the nanny that Cody was not exposed to this kind of behavior in their home, Jan then said she would correct his behavior and apologized for these very unexpected happenings. Several hours later, as she tucks her son into bed for the night, she asks him to tell her about his new friend. Cody tells his mother that his friend's name is Man. Thinking this was strange, and asking him why doesn't his friend have a real name, like John or George, she is quickly corrected by her son that it is simply Man. Finding this bizarre, but believing this to be somewhat normal, that her son is simply using his active imagination to create a friend who didn't really exist, she thinks nothing of it. However, in later interviews, she would have this to say: "I didn't realize it then, but this was a massive warning sign, and it's one I shouldn't have ignored." Shortly after putting her son to bed and laying down herself, Jan is woken up by the sound of thumping from across the hall. Stepping out into the hallway to examine just what this could be, she then hears the laughter of her son. Believing he's just playing, and very tired herself, she asks him to please stop through his door and to go back to bed. She then heads back to her own bedroom once again after the laughter ceases. Several hours later, in another bedroom down the hall, 16-year-old Pamela is woken up out of a sound sleep herself, but by something very different. Feeling as if she was being watched, she begins to hear scratching originating from underneath her bed. Perplexed, she rolls out of bed to look underneath it, and quickly, she comes face to face with nothing. The scratching then begins to move as if it's under the floorboards. It moves from underneath the bed, through the floor, and then up into the wall closest to her bedroom door. The poor teen has never experienced anything like this before. As the sounds continue, she quickly, yet cautiously makes her way out of her bedroom and into her parents' room. She would later describe the scratching sounds like someone taking their fingernails and with all of their strength, grating them against the various surfaces as the sound moved. Jan is startled awake as she sees a blackened figure standing over her. It's Pamela. telling her mother that she's scared. Jan, then thinking she must have had a nightmare, brings her into the bed to quell her fear. Although this night was strange to say the least, it's nothing compared to what's coming. The following morning, as Jan wakes up and begins getting ready for the day, she steps into the shower and begins washing herself. Several minutes into her shower, however, she hears something fall over in the bathroom, with the door closed, and after examining the room from the tub, she sees no one. She does, however, see a soap bottle that has fallen onto the floor from the side of the bathtub. Thinking this was weird due to its positioning, but overlooking it, she simply places the bottle back onto the ledge and continues with her shower. She then begins to hear footsteps walking all throughout the bathroom, rinsing the soap out of her hair and making sure she doesn't get any in her eyes. She then turns around and sees the outline of a man through the steamed up shower curtain. This man was tall, much taller than her husband, and she didn't hear the door open to indicate anyone else's presence. Panicking, she pulls the curtain aside, yet no one is there yet again. She does, however, see small, muddy, child-sized shoe prints on the floor. Quickly finishing her shower, and after drying off, she finds and checks Cody's shoes, but there are no signs of mud to be seen. This makes her uneasy because only his shoes would have even been close to how small the shoe prints were. Then, heading to her son's room to see if he was awake or not, she finds him playing with his toy fire truck in the corner of the room, yet he is speaking to a chair where no one is sitting. Telling his friend that he didn't want to do that he just wants to play with his toys, Cody is then interrupted by his mother, who asks him just who he's speaking with. Replying with, "Man," the little boy then continues to play with his fire truck. Jan then tells Cody that he needs to tell his friend goodbye, and that it's time to get ready for the day. This seems to turn a switch within the boy. Suddenly, her 5-year-old has gone from happy and playing with his toys to becoming irate at the drop of a dime, screaming at his mother that he didn't want to, and that man said he didn't have to. Being countered by his mother, she tells him that he will get ready, or there's gonna be serious consequences. Scowling at her, eventually, he does as he's told. But the look behind his eyes is one his mother doesn't recognize, and it'll become one all too common in the near future. Over the next several weeks, Cody's behavior has shifted completely. He's gone from a fairly calm and loving child to one that is cold, angry, and sometimes violent. He doesn't want to follow commands or do things he once enjoyed doing. He only wants to spend time with his imaginary friend, someone he calls Man. One afternoon, as his parents sit together watching their son play, they ask him to tell them about Man. Just who is he, and how old is he? Cody would set down the toys that he had been playing with and tell them he's 6, and that he has brown hair and brown eyes and pale skin. Interested in what he had to say, the couple would then ask their son, just where did Man come from? He would respond with, from behind the park, where the lake is, from deep underground. Obviously concerned and intrigued even further, Jan asked Cody if something happened to Man. Cody, with tears streaming down his face, would reply that a stranger took him from his mommy and did terrible things to him, that he cried for his mommy, but she never found him. With tears now falling from her eyes, Jan then asks her son, who would almost be the same age as Man, "Is Man dead, Cody?" His answer would cause a cold shiver to shake her entire body. He would answer with, "Yes." Disturbed by her son's answer, Jan Foster believes that her son may have befriended the spirit of a dead child. Dan, however, is not fully convinced. He believes it could be simply his son going through some changes emotionally, and that he was using his imagination to cope with this, albeit a strange backstory to his imaginary friend. He thinks that it's just that, imaginary. With this revelation, Jan decides to take researching things into her own hands. She decides the following day to go to the local library and to sift through records to see if she could find anything that sounded similar to the backstory of the boy that her son described to her. She avidly searches, going back as far as the records do that were available, about 50 years or so. Although she believes her son believes the story he told her, she begins to doubt what this entity could have told her son, because no evidence materializes of the dead boy's backstory. Over the next several months, Cody withdraws completely from interacting with the family. He didn't want to spend time with anyone. He stopped playing with his toys, and his only outlet seems to be Man. Day in and day out, he just continues to have full-blown conversations with this invisible person. Angered and feeling as if she was losing her son, Jan decides to try anything it takes to get him back. One evening, she makes a phone call to an old friend of hers, a Native American medicine man who she believes could perhaps offer insight on what to do about her family's situation. Within a day, he arrives. Speaking with Jan and Dale in their living room, he begins to hear from Jan just what all has been taking place. Dale, although skeptical of both his son's situation and now the involvement of a medicine man, remains so, but wants to support his wife, thinking that this could perhaps make her feel better about what had been happening. In his own words, "I was concerned that something had really scared Jan, and I knew that she was upset. Although I didn't believe in this kind of stuff, I thought that maybe it could help her feel better." As Jan finishes explaining the situation as a whole to the medicine man, he comes to the conclusion that it's possible that Cody has invited the spirit into the house. He explains that the only way to get rid of the spirit is to revoke the invitation by praying and forcibly cleansing the home. That the owner of the house had to do this on their own to banish the spirit. He then instructs Jan to burn sage and sweetgrass and direct it towards the four corners of the property. After this is done, each doorway of the home must be anointed with olive oil to finish the cleansing. He also warns that some spirits may not want to go so easily, and that it's imperative that she focus and pray the entire time for the spirit to leave, and most importantly, to pray for her son. The following morning, after everyone else had departed for the day, Jan begins the ritual. As the sage smoke smudges the air, Jan begins to worry, but tries her best to remain strong. In her own words, Was I worthy enough of God to hear my prayers, my strongest pleas to Him to help me through this, to help me cleanse this house and this property? I doubted myself for brief moments, that I wouldn't be able to. It was the fear of knowing if it didn't work, what would happen then? Within due time, she finishes the cleansing, but will it be enough? Later that night, once everyone else had returned home, she is brought to tears. Cody seems to be back to his old self. He's spending time with his father, having a story read to him from a book in his room before bed. Over the next 3 months, all is calm and well. Cody seems to be more responsive. He's much happier, and most importantly, there is no mention of any kind of an imaginary friend. That was until one afternoon. In Jan's own words, Cody wasn't totally back, but we were certainly making great strides. All seemed to be well, and then out of nowhere, 3 months after the ritual, he began speaking to man again. When I heard him, I could not move. I was in so much fear. He kept talking for a while, and then all of a sudden, he went quiet. When I went into his room, he was holding something in his hands. It was a photograph. I said, "Where did you get this?" I then reached down to grab it, and he went berserk. Cody screamed and clawed at her. His screams and yells seemed to be layered, as if 2 voices were speaking through him simultaneously. As Jan examined the photo, it appeared to be an older Polaroid, possibly from the late 50s or early 60s. There was an elderly woman, perhaps a grandmother, and next to her was a small boy. As her son relents, she asked him, just who was this a picture of? And he responded with, "Man." Shocked at what she was both looking at as well as hearing, Jan then asked Cody, "Where did you get this picture?" He proceeds to tell her that man gave it to him. This causes her to burst into tears. The ritual, which had seemed to work for a good portion of time, didn't seem to get rid of the entity. She now wonders what will happen now. What are the next steps that she can take for herself and her family? The following day, as Jan arrives back home from work, she walks into chaos. Cody is screaming and berating the nanny. He's thrown his food onto the floor. She immediately goes to reprimand her son and is surprised by what he does. With one hand, he shoves her, and he does so with so much force that she falls down into the wall behind her. Cody then screams at her, "Man said I didn't have to listen to any of you anymore." And then he runs out of the room. Stunned by both her son's strength and behavior, she gets back up off the ground, now to see the nanny packing her things. She had decided that she couldn't deal with the child anymore. She suggests getting him some counseling, and although Jan tries her absolute best to keep her employed, she leaves. Later that night, Jan tries to keep herself together as the family sits down to eat dinner. In her own words, "I was trying to keep things together. I needed to be an employee, a mother, and a wife. I was also the one bearing the brunt of my son's abuse. But by now, there was no love coming from Cody. No hugs, kisses, or real interactions. Just pure hatred. He was a total stranger to me at this point, and I didn't know how to handle this." She begins to believe that something far more sinister then a little boy is manipulating her son. She's unsure of exactly what it is, but she knows deep down that it's evil. After losing the nanny, Jan and Dale have to start taking Cody to a cousin's house to be watched during the day so the two could work to support the family. After dropping Cody off for the first time at the cousin's house, Jan then heads to work like normal. Several hours into her workday, as she loads packages onto a mail truck, she is told she has an urgent phone call. It's from her cousin. In her own words, "When I picked up the phone, she was incoherent. She was crying and kept repeating that I had to come get Cody now, that she could not watch him anymore." Rushing from work to her cousin's house, Jan has no idea what could have happened, but is quickly about to find out. She arrives and runs up to the door and is greeted by her cousin, holding Cody by the arm. She is then told what had happened. When Cody and her daughter were playing in the living room while she cleaned in the kitchen, she listened to make sure that everything was okay. She began to hear another voice, a third voice, one that was deeper, like that of a grown man. Concerned, but still trying to decipher what was happening, the air was then filled with the screams of her daughter. Running to the living room, she then saw Cody standing across from her daughter, with multiple toys floating in the air around them. Upon seeing the scene, she covered her mouth trying not to scream, as the toys fell one by one and hit the ground. She told Jan that she was afraid of Cody, and that not only could she not watch him anymore, but that her daughter was not allowed to play with him either. It's a somber drive back home. Jan knows that she has to have someone watch Cody during the day because she can't afford to lose her job. Once the two arrive, she grabs the phone book and frantically begins calling daycares, trying to find a reputable place that will take him. Finally finding one after a few phone calls, she sighs with relief. After hanging up the phone, she sits at the table with her son. She tells him that he is in no circumstances allowed to take man with him anywhere, but especially to his new daycare. Surprisingly, the child agrees not to. For the next week, all seems well during the day, with Cody at daycare and his parents working their jobs. But at night, the entity known as man waits for him to return. One evening, as Dale goes to Cody's room to get him for supper, he finds his son cutting up stuffed animals. Although the incident disturbs him, he doesn't blame it on anything paranormal. He sits Cody in the living room and discusses the matter with his wife in the adjacent kitchen. In the meantime, Cody had other plans. As Dale describes that man told their son that it was okay for him to cut up his toys to Jan, the two suddenly stop when they hear the muffled screams of the family cat. Pamela, heading out of her bedroom, then confronts her younger brother. She yells at him and pushes him off the couch. There, underneath where he had been sitting, he had trapped the cat with a cushion and a pillow, seemingly trying to suffocate it. As Pamela tends to the poor animal, Jan and Dale rush into the room, and they see a sinister grin upon Cody's face. Horrified, the couple realize that they can't pretend to be rational anymore. Whatever that's happening to their son was serious, but they were unsure of just how to tackle the situation. The following morning, as Jan goes to grab clothes from Cody's closet to get him ready for daycare, she notices that his clothes are damp. And that wouldn't be all. His toys and bed were wet as well. She would discover that her son had been urinating all over his things, inside and outside of his closet. Further disturbed, she then confronts him, and he says that man told him it was okay, and that he didn't have to listen to her anymore. He then begins hitting her and lashing out, which only causes her more emotional torment. In her own words, everything started happening at such a fast pace. The behavior, the urinating, trying to kill the kitten. I just wanted my son back, and I felt as if he was being controlled by some kind of monster. One cold night, as wind whips the windows of the house, the Fosters are surprised by a visitor in their room in the middle of the night. It's Cody. He's calling out to them for the first time in a very long time. He said that his bed was shaking and that he needed his mama. At this moment, Jan saw the glimpse of the boy she hadn't seen in over a year. As she holds her child for the first time in what feels like an eternity, she knows that man is not with him. She also is reminded why she must keep fighting for her boy. That ultimately, she must confront this entity. Waiting until Cody was fast asleep in their bed with Dale, Jan quietly gets out of bed and heads down the hallway and towards Cody's room by herself. With every step she takes, she's silently praying to God to give her the strength to confront whatever this creature is that has a grip on her family. Finally making it to the threshold of the room, she takes a deep breath and enters. Glancing around the room, she sees nothing. Wanting to put herself in the shoes of her son, she lays down where he would normally sleep in his bed, hoping that if she persists enough, that man would possibly try to communicate with her. She lays there for several minutes, but nothing happens. She then sees who she believes to be her son in the doorway. Calling out to him, he comes to her and embraces her. However, Jan soon senses that something is horribly wrong. The embrace feels all wrong. His hands are ice cold, and then suddenly, she realizes that this isn't her son at all. As she pushes the figure back, it begins to grow. It soon towers over her. Its skin is pale, and its eyes a deep blood red. Its teeth are gnarled and rotten. It pushes her down onto the bed and begins laughing in a deep, demonic tone. In Jan's own words, he started laughing very demonically when this sudden realization came over me. This was man. Screaming for her life, the apparition disappears in the blink of an eye as soon as her family rushes into Cody's room to figure out just what was going on. Dale then holds his wife as she sobs uncontrollably. Once she finally regains her bearings, Jan calms the rest of the family down enough to get them all back into bed for the night. She, however, is unable to sleep. Heading to the living room, contemplating just what exactly to do about this grievous revelation, she begins begging God for guidance. In her own words yet again, I was frightened beyond means, but another part of me, once the adrenaline started surging, knew that I had to face this. I had to do something to protect my family, and to protect Cody, and to keep this entity from taking him any further. Jan considers many things, including packing up her family to move, but she thinks that man is certainly attached to her son, that it wouldn't do any good. She doesn't sleep through the rest of the night. The following morning, as everyone else heads out to start their day, she takes Cody to daycare, as is the normal routine. But instead of heading to work herself, she heads back home and makes an urgent phone call. She calls her friend, who is a Native American medicine man. By this time, she hasn't spoken to him in about a year since everything started. Thankfully, he picks up on the other end. She explains everything that has been transpiring and that she's seen the entity with her own eyes. That she believes it to be some kind of demon. That this abhorrent entity had been masquerading as a little boy to gain entry into her son's life. The shaman explains that he now understands why the initial cleansing didn't work. He believed that the intent was not specific enough, since they believed that they were revoking an invitation of a little boy and not something darker. He then tells her that she will have to bless the house again, only this time she must focus with all of her strength on ridding the home of this evil spirit. Jan wonders if she's strong enough to be able to accomplish this alone. In her own words, "I didn't know if I was going to be able to do this myself. I'm just a mom. I'm not a priest, albeit I have a spiritual side, but I was willing to give it my all to defend myself and my family." The shaman tells her that she must do this and must be brave and forceful with her intent to banish this demon, that she must not show any doubt in her efforts. With these parting words, Jan braces herself and then gets to work performing a second ritual. Starting on the four corners of the property, she creates a barrier using olive oil. She then enters a state of constant prayer while she sages around her property, slowly working her way inside. This time, instead of feeling weak, she begins to feel an inner strength, as if someone or something was standing beside her during her prayers. As she enters her home, she notices that the temperature of the house is abnormally cold, frigid, to the point to where she can see her breath hang in the air as it fills with sage smoke. She knows there is a presence that resides within its walls. Feeling as if she's being watched, she continues to pray and smudge the home, going from room to room. As she does this, the walls and windows begin to shake, yet her prayers are uninterrupted. She knows that man is watching her and trying to break her concentration. As the activity reaches a fever pitch, so do her prayers. She is yelling now and calling upon God to banish the entity known as man from her home and from all of their lives. It is here that suddenly and violently all of the doors within the house open, and an unearthly scream echoes all throughout the house. Then, as quickly as the doors opened, they suddenly all slammed closed. Breathing heavily, Jan immediately notices that the feeling within the home is like night turning to day. In her own words, it was as if a veil had lifted, a dark veil of pain and confusion. I noticed the trees, and I could hear the birds. I was back to a normal reality. Following this intense cleansing, the entity known as man has yet to return. In due time, the foster family seemed to go back to normal. Cody in particular ceased the horrendous behavior and was no longer influenced by the darkness of the demonic. However, this wasn't the end to the strange paranormal manifestations they would all experience. They continued to hear noises they couldn't explain and feel as if unseen eyes were watching them at all times. Was this the demon known as man slithering around them, watching and waiting to devour their very souls? This case has been requested numerous times for me to cover, and I'm glad to have finally given it its time of day. It's certainly a terrifying and very intriguing one to say the least. The names within the case were changed to protect the anonymity of the family who was involved. Therefore, updates, as hard as I looked, are unavailable. I can only hope that the Foster family, or whoever they may be, are good and safe today. That Cody and Pamela have grown up to be decent, functioning people, and I truly wish them all the best. With that being said, I do have several questions and statements I'd like to share with you now. These are my thoughts on the case as a whole. First of all, just how did man enter Cody's life? Was it a demon that was stalking or haunting the land itself? Was it picked up somewhere else and then brought back with the child? It obviously posed itself as a child in order to gain Cody's trust to begin with. This reminds me a lot of the Sally House case, which I just covered several weeks ago now, and it goes to show that the demonic has no qualms about masquerading itself as the ultimate innocence in order to prey upon us. Do you think the native banishing was sufficient, or do you think a Catholic priest should have been involved? I'm always curious to hear people's feedback on situations like this, because I have personally seen a banishing happen in real time using sage, but the entity was just forced outside of the house. It continued to try to get back in. But if cleansing using sage on the property as a whole as well as the house was done, maybe it would have forced the spirit out entirely. Considering Jan used Christian prayer alongside sage and sweetgrass smudging, it certainly makes for a very interesting hybrid cleansing that, in my opinion, would have worked if her faith was strong enough. If man gave Cody an old Polaroid of who he supposedly was in life, as the one shown to Jan by Cody, with the little boy and the elderly lady, just where did this picture come from? And who did it end up being? Did it come from inside the house or somewhere else? And lastly, as to not pose too many questions, if the family continued to experience paranormal happenings, such as unexplained noises and the feelings of being watched, was man ever truly banished, or just weakened by Jan's cleansing efforts? Or, if man was banished, did perhaps something else happen on the land where the home now sits that could have potentially scarred it, such as a tragic event? And with this being said, could there possibly be a portal on the land, or now within the house itself, one where the veil between our world and the next is much thinner, allowing entities, especially dark ones, to sneak through? Ultimately, your conclusions are up to you. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to give it a like, share it around, and subscribe with notifications on to my channel. All those things help me out tremendously, and I truly appreciate it. If you would like to watch my content ad-free, you can watch all of it without ads by clicking join and joining the YouTube membership program, or by visiting patreon.com/mystery archives. You can also support the channel and help me do bigger and cooler investigations by picking up my books or some merchandise, either from me directly from my store listed here, or you can pick up my books from Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or really most places where you can find books. But I sign them if you buy them directly from me. You may have noticed the audio is a little different in this one, and that's because with the winter storm we recently had, I lost power for a good while and had several power surges throughout, and it cooked my power supply to my mixer. So while I'm waiting for a replacement so I can use my mixer again and use my usual microphone with my mixer, I actually borrowed my old microphone from my brother, which I'm definitely thankful for. And he makes content over at Bornstellar 731, And if you enjoy video game and show type topics or need a palate cleanser after watching my spooky content, you can check him out. Or you can check out some more of my scarier episodes, which I have hundreds now, and I'll list the playlist at the end of this video. With that, guys, I truly appreciate all of you. I hope your new year is off to a great start. This has been Cody here at Mystery Archives. Please make sure to stay safe out there, and take care. I'll see you next time. After exploring a tunnel with a dark and terrifying history, a couple soon learns that their home has been invaded by an uninvited darkness. The presence toys with them, but in due time, it would reveal the true horror of its nature. Will they survive, or will the abyss take them? This is the true and terrifying story of Candace and John St. Clair's haunting, which took place in Appalachia in 2010. And this one, as with most of the stories I've researched and covered on this channel, I wouldn't recommend watching this episode in the dark, unless you like looking over your shoulder and jumping at every small noise that goes bump in the night. Nestled on the banks of the Lavisa River and surrounded by the mountains of Appalachia lies the small town of Grundy, Virginia, a place now known for community pride. It also has a dark history. From slavery to mine explosions and other accidents, these events weave a complicated web of despair. Despair that could have perhaps played a role in the story that I am about to tell. Candace St. Clair shivered despite the warm Virginia air as she and her husband John stood before the gaping mouth of an abandoned tunnel. A jagged arch of crumbling stone loomed over them, covered in streaks of moss and graffiti. The surrounding forest was eerily quiet, as if even the animals avoided this place. Creepy as hell, huh? John smirked, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The beam barely penetrated the tunnel's interior. It was swallowed almost immediately by thick blackness within. Yeah, let's just get this over with, Candace murmured, gripping his arm. Their friend Stacy had told them about the tunnel's legend, a story that intrigued the couple, but one that almost made them err on the side of caution. The story was that a wealthy man back in the 1800s had built this tunnel using slave labor. One night, he had caught one of the slaves with his wife. Angered at this discovery, he punished the slave responsible, and as a result, the other slaves had begun to rebel against him. In an act of rage and malice, the slave master then took the majority of his slaves and had them sealed within the walls of the tunnels, alive, forever encasing the human souls within the tunnel itself. The whispered stories of phantom voices in the dark, feeling unseen hands brushing against visitors, and worst of all, the belief that something unexplained lurked inside, watching and waiting for the unsuspecting. It was just a legend, they had told themselves, a story. But even standing at the entrance, Candace felt an inexplicable weight pressing on her chest. Candace adjusted the recorder in her hand. She had always been sensitive to the paranormal, and while John treated their ghost hunting adventures as a joke, she felt drawn to this place as if something was calling her. As they stepped inside, the temperature plummeted. Then, as John whispered a mocking, come out wherever you are," almost as soon as the words left his lips, a rush of chilly wind blasted past them. and the couple believed that they had heard a series of whispers, ones that were just beyond their ability to make out what they were saying. Candace's stomach twisted. They weren't alone. Frightened, she then asked John to leave. That night, when they returned home, things felt off. Their new house had felt warm and inviting, but that night, the air inside felt stagnant, damp, and heavy, like the inside of a tomb. It felt smothering, as if an unseen weight pressed against their chests. The couple had recently purchased and moved into their home, which was located on the outskirts of town, just close enough to town for errands, and just far out enough for peace. And things hadn't at all felt this way before. Deciding that perhaps their nerves were getting the best of them, the couple, along with their daughter, decided to lay down for the night for some much-needed rest. But as the moonlight cast its shadow upon the rocky exterior of the mountains surrounding them, and nocturnal predators hunted their prey, perhaps a different hunter of sorts now also stalked its prey within the walls of the St. Clair home. Their 5-year-old daughter, JC, tossed and turned in her sleep. She seemed to be calling out to someone or something. Her cries caught the attention of her mother, who quickly got out of bed herself and began to head toward her room. However, when Candace entered her room, expecting to see her daughter laying in her bed, perhaps having a nightmare, she instead found the little girl sitting straight up in bed. She was staring at the corner of her room by her closet. "Sweetie," Candace whispered, stepping closer. "Are you okay?" JC turned to look at her, blinking slowly, as if waking from a dream. "The man in the tunnel is here, Mommy." Candace's blood turned to ice. They had not taken JC with them to the tunnel, nor had they mentioned it to her or around her. Following that night's events, JC would have nightmares night after night. She would say that the man from the tunnel was there with her, and it scared her. Accompanying these nightmares, the young girl also soon started sleepwalking, oftentimes startling her parents awake in their own room by standing next to their bed with a glazed look in her eyes. But when she'd be asked by her parents what she was doing, she wouldn't be able to remember what had happened. Trying to play off the mention of any man from the tunnel, they figured their poor daughter was just struggling to get used to a new environment. That perhaps the stress of the move, alongside other changes, had caused this sudden development. That she would get used to things in due time. Perhaps she would, or perhaps not. With her husband working on a project in the basement, and her daughter at dance practice, Candace, who sewed pageant clothes for JC in her spare time, was doing so one evening. As she toiled away on her sewing machine, the calm rhythmic hum was abruptly shattered by a deafening crashing noise that echoed all throughout the house. Unsure of just what on earth the sound was, with her heart hammering inside of her chest and her adrenaline surging, she made her way from the upstairs sewing room down the stairs, apprehensively checking all around with each step as she descended. She then heard it again, the sound of glass breaking. It seemed to be originating from the kitchen, but just what or who was doing this? As she approached the kitchen, she would be shocked by what she would find. Before her very eyes, every single cabinet door stood open. Their contents, her dishes, lay in shattered remains on the floor. Bowls, plates, and cups of every kind lay in pieces everywhere, scattered as if someone or something had removed them from the cabinets and with great force threw them down with incredible impact. In her own words, every single cabinet door was open, and every single dish I had was broken. I didn't have a plate or a glass left. Everything I had was completely smashed. That was, except a small decorative plate that was on display there in her kitchen. However, before her very eyes, she watched as it began to move on its own, wobbling back and forth. It then flew across the room towards her and shattered on the wall next to her. With her daughter and husband nowhere near the general vicinity and in a state of shock, Candace screamed for her husband. Hearing the cries of his wife, John soon arrived by her side from elsewhere in the house. He too couldn't believe what he was witnessing, asking her just how this happened, with her telling him that she came downstairs to this. His mind immediately thought that there could perhaps be an intruder within the home. Quickly going into protector mode, John began sweeping the house. Not only did he not find anyone, but all of the doors and windows were still locked. This just further added to the mystery. JC, who has continued to struggle with nightmares and apparent sleepwalking, has begun sleeping with her parents in an effort to quell everyone's fears. A few nights later, following the kitchen incident, as the moon hung high over the St. Clair residence, Candace wakes up out of a sound sleep. The air in the house felt heavy and damp yet again. She was sweating, and there didn't seem to be any circulation in the air. Getting up to turn on the air conditioner, she walks down the stairs and towards the thermostat on the wall at the bottom. Wiping sweat from her brow, she then reaches out to turn it on and adjust the temperature of the house, when all of a sudden, she felt a hand grip her wrist. In her own words yet again, I felt something grab my wrist, and I knew my family was asleep upstairs. My heart skipped a beat. I turned around, and there was nothing there. I was terrified. I looked down the hallway, and I didn't see anything. There was nothing there. I thought, am I going crazy? Am I just really sleepy? I wasn't sure. So, not knowing what to make of the bizarre experience, she slowly starts walking back up the stairs. Still scared, but certainly unsure, she decides that this time she'll keep the experience to herself. But whatever force that seemed to lurk in the shadows was far from finished. Over the next several weeks to come, Candace continues to experience strange manifestations within her home. Things that begin to make her second-guess herself and question her own sanity. One night, while John is at work, Candace puts JC to bed in her own room this time, or so she thinks. As she folds laundry downstairs, she hears her daughter still awake. Heading back upstairs and approaching her room to tell her that it's time for bed, she instead comes face to face with nothing. The room is empty. Then, from behind her, she begins to hear multiple things that are very odd, to say the least. She begins to hear the sound of her daughter giggling and laughing from the other room. And as she walks towards these sounds, she begins to hear something else. the sounds of labored, heavy breathing. Continuing to follow the sounds of her daughter's laughter, she finds herself approaching her own bedroom. Upon opening the door, thinking her daughter is playing some sort of trick on her, she instead finds her fast asleep in her and John's bed. Unsure yet again what to make of this very unnerving experience, she turns around and quietly shuts the door behind her. After doing so, she takes several steps down the hallway toward the direction of the stairs. The lights begin to flicker. Looking around, slightly disoriented at first, she finds her eyes landing on a figure at the end of the hallway. This figure is much too large to be a man. It stands at least 10 feet tall, and at first, given its distance from her, it appears dark as the night. However, as it begins slowly and menacingly walking towards her, she starts to make out horrid features. In Candace's own words, this thing was huge, easily 10 feet tall. It had horns and scales. I began to freeze. It's like everything froze. My thoughts and everything. There was just this one moment of absolute silence. Time stands still briefly, and then you're jerked back into reality, and then you go into survival mode. As the creature gets closer to her, she makes out its abhorrent and terrifying features. It then, staring at her with jet black eyes, protruding teeth and horns, reaches towards her with clawed hands. Almost as soon as it makes contact with her skin, a scream erupts from her lips. She is touched, but not by this creature. Instead, her screams are interrupted by her husband, who has found her screaming at the end of the hallway in front of their bedroom door. In John's words, "I had worked late that evening, and when I had got home, I found her like that, and she was incredibly upset, asking his wife, Candace, what's wrong? She then tries to explain what she had seen and experienced, but words can only do so much. With first their daughter's night terrors, then their dishes being broken, and now this. She believes that there is something here in the house, and that she may have just seen what it is. John, however, feels differently. He just thought his wife may have been having a bit of an emotional breakdown, not only from being overworked, but with him having to oftentimes work long hours. He thought maybe she just needed a break to recuperate. But Candace knows what she saw. She tells him, "You know what? You can take it or leave it, but I know what I saw, and I know that there's something in this house. There's something going on here that's deeper than either of us can imagine, and I don't feel safe here anymore." This event proves to be a diverging event for the couple. Following it, Candace finds it hard to confide in her husband, and the two grow distant. One afternoon, shortly after Candace had seen the creature, she was measuring her daughter for a new pageant dress in the family living room. John, who was off work that day, was watching TV. Occasionally, the TV had done strange things, such as cycle through the channels, emit a loud, high-pitched noise, or turn itself on and off without any involvement of the remote or the physical pressing of buttons. It started doing this again as the three were in the room together. Believing it to be an electrical short within that part of the house, John dismisses the TV's strange behavior. He then goes and unplugs it as it's cycling through the channels and making the high-pitched noise. The screen then goes black. As he gets back up to head to get some of his tools to take a look at the wiring, in front of all three of them, the TV turns back on, with JC asking just what the television was doing as Candace and John stare in bewilderment at it, for it's on and acting erratic, and with no power source at all at that. Neither of them know what to tell her, or even what to say for that matter. Finally, after a few seconds that feel like hours, Candace breaks the silence. She says, I don't feel safe here. We need to leave. She then tells JC that the two of them are going to go to the park. In her own words, that was my breaking point with John. He was looking around and thinking, what do I check now? Because he had checked everything, and the TV was on without being plugged in. Several weeks would pass by after this event, and the once happy couple had further drifted apart. Their once thriving marriage and relationship were practically non-existent. Communication had broken down, and a blanket of sorrow now covered them all. One night, as John had some beers downstairs by himself, while his wife and child slept upstairs, Candace is suddenly and brutally woken up by large clawed hands strangling her. She can't scream, and she can't breathe. She's then thrown from her side of the bed to the other. As she rolls, gasping for air, she looks up and sees what she describes as a gargoyle-like creature, the same one she had seen in the hallway a good while ago now. Its skin was like leather, its eyes were black as the abyss, and its face was semi-human in appearance. She would later say that while she was in that moment, I felt as if this thing had taken everything else from me, and now it was going to take my life. All I could think about was that I'm going to die. I'm not going to be here anymore. My family isn't going to have me anymore. And it was the most terrifying feeling imaginable. Now off the bed and her back against the bedroom wall, the creature once again comes after her. As John sits downstairs, he is soon called to action when he hears the shrill screams of his wife upstairs. Rushing to their bedroom as fast as he possibly can, he finds Candace crying out in pain and in a ball on the floor. After helping her back onto the bed, she tells him that this creature attacked her. She then, wincing in pain, lifts up her shirt to reveal 3 long and huge, bleeding scratch marks across her stomach. John doesn't know what to make of the situation. Candace is now far past the point of trying to convince him that something is haunting their home. She instead puts her faith in her higher power. But after reaching out to dozens of churches and religious organizations, and having no help or the offer of assistance from any of them, she knows that it's up to her to fight this battle for the sake of herself and her family without their assistance. After doing research on the internet, she puts together a list of specific prayers and gets several bottles of anointed oil. She then, after a deep breath, begins the cleansing of her house. She goes room to room, putting the anointed oil on each doorway and calling out from her Bible for God to clear the home of any negative beings that could be there uninvited. From the back of the house to the front, she is cleansing and reclaiming her home. Following her efforts, She immediately notices that the environment as a whole feels so much lighter. The air seemed fresher and easier to breathe. In the coming weeks, this would continue to be the case. But in the back of her mind, she was frightened that whatever this entity was could potentially come back. Life for a time seemed to go back to normal for the St. Clairs, and although weary, they all tried to resume their normal day-to-day activities. That was until one solemn night. John is in the bedroom, changing his clothes after a work day, when he soon gets the sneaking suspicion that someone is watching him. Turning around and expecting to perhaps see his wife standing in the room, he is instead greeted by something very different. In his words, it looked like a person in the face, but it was distorted. It had these long horns and teeth and these scales. It just kept getting closer and closer to me. And the closer it got to me, the hotter I got. Now sweating profusely, with the creature mere inches away from him, it then points its clawed finger towards his chest. And within seconds, it's holding his beating heart. As he stands there, petrified with fear and struggling to breathe, this creature is just staring back at him with black eyes, holding his heart. John suddenly wakes up out of a dead sleep. Thankfully, it was just a dream, albeit a horrible one at that. After calming himself down, which takes several minutes, he finally lays his head back down to try and rest again. But when his head hits the pillow, he then starts hearing footsteps from somewhere else in the house. With his adrenaline surging and already on the edge from his nightmare, he quickly gets up to investigate. Peering out into the hallway, he sees nothing. With Candace still asleep in their bed, and now checking on their daughter, she too is asleep. Continuing to hear footsteps downstairs, he slowly makes his way down to the base level, further fearing what he may find. Glancing around at first, he sees nothing yet again, but turning back after looking behind himself, he is suddenly face to face with a massive figure. Its skin is rough and cracked, like aged leather stretched too tight over jagged bones. The eyes were pits of blackness, voids that seemed to drink the light around them. It didn't move, and it didn't blink. It only watched. But in an instant, with incredible speed, it surged toward him and grabbed him by his throat with its gnarled, clawed hand. In John's words, in the blink of an eye, it grabbed my neck and lifted me straight up and off the ground. It seemed like it was letting me know that it was there, that it was in control, and I wasn't. Then, almost as quickly as the attack had begun, it was over. John was thrown to the ground, discarded like garbage. As he lay alternating between gasping and screaming, Candace soon rushes to his aid. The touch of her hand on his arm causes his adrenaline to spike, and he shoots up to the sitting position. Then, realizing that it was his wife and not that thing, he begins to apologize profusely. After validating one another, with John now absolutely convinced that there is something malevolent and paranormal dwelling within the walls of their home, the St. Clairs know that they must try and seek help immediately. Together, they begin researching
and eventually come across the Southern Highlands Paranormal Investigation Group. Upon speaking with one of its members, a man named Stacy Cookner, the group soon agrees to come and conduct a formal investigation of the property. Upon arrival, Stacy and one of his colleagues decide to conduct a series of questions to whatever force may be lurking there, using the flashlight method in conjunction with an audio device in the hopes of capturing EVPs or electronic voice phenomena. The flashlight method is that one places a flashlight upright on a table and asks the spirits to reply using yes or no responses through turning off and on the light. For a good while, the team is unsuccessful in making any sort of contact. However, upon asking if whatever stalked the family had followed them from another place, the flashlight suddenly turns itself on. A follow-up question is then asked: "Are you a malevolent force?" The flashlight once again lights up. These questions and the following frighten and confirm what Candace and John already knew. The final question is: "Are you demonic or non-human in nature?" To which the flashlight, once again, brighter than ever, illuminates the room. Stacy then tells the couple that it's important that they try and figure out why this entity followed them and from where, in order to try and rid themselves of the attachment. Candace tells him that ever since she was little, she seemed to be able to sense certain things, almost as if she's in tune with the other side. This is not information she has ever shared out loud before with anyone. Believing that Candace could perhaps be sensitive to the paranormal, and upon further inquiry, the couple remembers the tunnel all those months ago. With this information, Stacy thinks that it's possible that a demonic entity may have attached itself to Candace while they were there, due to her abilities. In Stacy's words, due to all the evil that had taken place there, and also due to its secluded nature, it was really a prime breeding ground for something dark to manifest itself. Someone who is psychic may inadvertently be open in a spiritual sense, and must be extra careful when traveling to different locations, because any negative forces may realize their presence and seek them out, leading to attachments. Believing the presence to be demonic, he tells the couple that they must cleanse the home immediately, that only good can conquer evil. In the coming days, he puts them in contact with a Catholic priest that he has worked with in the past to come and bless the home. Upon the priest's arrival, he debriefs the family. He tells them that they must be in solidarity with one another and with him. He hands them prayer cards to assist him with the cleansing itself. Then, all together, they begin to pray. They call upon Saint Michael the Archangel and ask for his assistance in ridding the home of demonic forces. At the end of the blessing, the house feels better to everyone, lighter, as if whatever dark force that had infested their lives had perhaps been vanquished. In the coming months, the family slowly begins to slip back into a life of normalcy, one they had craved, but had almost all but forgotten. Beauty pageants, closeness, and love had returned. One day, as the St. Clairs get ready to go out to dinner, Candace tells JC to quickly finish getting ready while standing outside her room. JC is sitting on her bed with one of her toys, facing away from her mother. Almost as quickly as the phrase exits Candace's mouth, she hears her daughter reply to her, but not from the top of her bed, in front of her eyes, but rather from behind her at the bottom of the stairs with John. Confused because she was hearing and seeing her daughter behind her, but also seeing her daughter in front of her, Candace tells JC to stay with her father. The JC sitting before her then slowly begins to turn its head towards Candace. In her words, this child's face was almost hazy, like blurry, as if there was something missing. As the being stares at Candace, its eyes begin to turn a familiar black color, just like the very same light-absorbing abyssal spheres that had belonged to the demon that had plagued them just months ago. It then vanishes. But as it does, Candace hears the scream of her daughter at the bottom of the stairs. Rushing down to her, it quickly becomes apparent that she has a long and now bleeding scratch across her face. This was the last straw for the St. Clairs. It was horrible enough that the demon had attacked the two of them, but to attack their child, they could no longer handle it. Although the demon could potentially follow them, they decide to take their chances. Seeing no other alternative, the family abandons what was supposed to be their dream home, leaving behind all of their belongings and fleeing with just the clothes on their backs. In the months to come, the family would find another place to live. Fortunately, although they believed that the demon had attached itself to Candace initially, they now believed that it had attached itself to the home because no further activity plagued them. No more horrendous manifestations, day or nightmares, or hellish attacks. Although I did my best to try and find an update on the family, I wasn't able to find out exactly how they're doing now. But I hope wherever they are, that they are safe and truly no longer tormented by the demonic. I'm not sure if they still own the original home in which the case took place, but I do know that following their departure, as soon as 2016, the house has remained vacant. In the aftermath, Candace and John turned their frightening experience into a calling. They founded a group called Spirit Seekers Paranormal Investigation Research Team in 2012, aiming to help other families deal with hauntings. This is their team's website, spiritseekersteam.wixsite.com. By forming Spirit Seekers, the couple sought to do more than document ghostly activity. They wanted to actively seek and help remove evil entities and protect others from suffering like they did. During their own experiences with their haunting, Candace discovered she had a spiritual gift, and as previously explained, they believed that the demon targeted her because she is sensitive to the spirit world. She has since embraced her role as a psychic medium, becoming the team's resident medium. Candace is described as a medium psychic and a magnet for paranormal activity who can communicate with spirits and help them move on. This marks a dramatic personal change from haunted victim to healer as she channels her gift to ensure others don't have to flee their homes like she once did. Before we go, I did want to share some of my thoughts on the case as a whole, in no particular order. I do think it's possible that the demon followed them from the tunnel. The tunnel, along with many others in that area, and really the area as a whole, has a lot of dark history associated with it. I think Stacy said it well when he said it seemed to be a breeding ground for evil. I think that traumatic events, like the legend the St. Clairs were originally told by their friend, that prompted their interest in going in the first place, could very well have attracted a creature of hell, in my opinion. It always amazes me how often husbands don't believe their wives, or have to literally be mauled by an entity in order to believe that what they've been told is actually taking place. Referring to John and many others in cases I've covered, it's not always the case, but it certainly occurs enough that it's become a bit of a trope in these stories. I also find it interesting how Candace was experiencing these daymare-type experiences with the demon. The way she describes time essentially standing still, as if she's entered a different plane of reality, or is frozen in her own time, while this entity is in proximity to her. I've heard of this in other cases, and figured it was worth mentioning, because it truly is interesting. I've heard about this in other cases, and figured it was worth mentioning. It is also very interesting that Candace's cleansing, as well as the priest's, ultimately both didn't work. Albeit they both seemed to stave off the demon for a short period of time, but they didn't banish it altogether. I wonder personally if they tried any other methods or belief systems, or if they would be open to doing so if they still own the house. Also, I'm curious if they dealt with a mimic, considering it masqueraded itself in various forms throughout their experiences. The whole concept of mimics terrifies me personally. There's just something about it that's just creepy. There are many questions with this case, and I'd like to hear what your thoughts are down in the comments below. Please also give this video a like, share it around, and subscribe with notifications on. If you want to further support the channel, consider picking up one of my books or some merch at mysteryarchives.myshopify.com, where you can use the code MASALE for 15% off your entire order right now. You can also check out my Patreon or support the channel through the YouTube membership program here. Could rebuilding your life cause destruction? Could it stir up an old evil? When a family loses their father in a blaze, the widow and her 2 children are looking for a fresh start. But after moving into what was supposed to be their next chapter, they soon would discover that they aren't its only inhabitants, as entities emerge from the walls to collect their very souls. Will they survive or be consumed by the darkness that surrounds them? This is the untold story of the demonic Long Island haunting, also known as the Long Island Terror of New York. This one, even for me, is such an insane story. Again, I will advise you to not watch this episode alone or in the dark. Please subscribe to the channel with notifications on and leave this video a like. Now, let's get to the content. Our story begins as a building blazes in the Bronx, New York. Firefighters, attempting to extinguish the blaze, have become trapped inside the 4-story complex, right at the very top. Sadly, all 6 of them are forced to choose between jumping or succumbing to the flames. Several of the men survive, and several do not. Lieutenant Curtis Mayran of Battalion 26, the husband of Jeanette Mayran, did not. Kurt wasn't just a firefighter, he was a family man, a loving husband, and a father of 2. His passing was not only completely unexpected, but downright devastating to all those involved. The saddening events shatter any resemblance of a planned future that Jeanette foresaw. Following the tragedy, she had to tell her 2 girls that they would never see their father again. The 2 are inconsolable. To make things worse, every day following the public announcement of what had happened, her home has been besieged by the media. No care, no compassion. They just wanted a word and a picture to sell their latest headline. The harassment was constant during this time, so thinking of how to solve a crisis, Jeanette begins to ask herself, should she try and find a little small place somewhere for her and the girls to escape to start over at, to start fresh. With snow still melting outside, she takes them for a car ride one afternoon and seems to stumble across a deal that was an answer to her prayers. Located outside the city, and with the rarity of an acre of land, sits a rather large home. It will need some work, but she thinks she could make that happen. From the moment she lays eyes on it, Jeanette feels that this is the one. This could be a way to give her girls and herself a new life. She jumps on the opportunity, and to her bewilderment, her offer is accepted. Within a month, the Mayrans move from the home that Curtis built to a new home, a fresh start outside of the city. With the transfer of each bag and each box of belongings, they feel as if they're that much closer to peace, the thing that they really all wanted. The home, as mentioned, needed some restoration, but with Curtis being a firefighter, his brothers in service took it upon themselves to look out for his family. With all the manpower, the work should be done within a couple weeks. However, with the restoration of the home, devastation would follow. As the construction toils on, and unfamiliar with the area, with valuable tools being left around on occasion, as well as their own safety to worry about, Jen decides to put up security cameras to monitor things. In total, they have 7 cameras installed around the property. The first night that the cameras go live, Jen is curious just what all they can see and detect. So with this being new technology to her, she sits in the living room on her computer, tuning into just what was taking place outside of her walls. It's nighttime, and the cameras are in night vision mode, portraying black and white. As she clicks through the different cameras as the evening progresses, she doesn't see much. That was until in the middle of a frame, she sees a man. This man is standing and staring at her home. Given the quality of the cameras at the time, she didn't panic, thinking perhaps that her eyes were playing tricks on her. To be safe, she makes sure that the home is entirely secure and eventually relaxes enough to be able to try and get some sleep. As an icy wind blows outside and the light snow trickles down and coats the earth, Jeanette and her 2 girls lay in their beds. Her mother and sister are asleep to her knowledge, but Angela is particularly restless. She can't seem to sleep. Tossing and turning, she has an uneasy feeling in the pit of her stomach. As she toils away in her room, she is suddenly interrupted by a strange banging sound. As she sits up and listens, she hears it again. However, these thumps or knocks seem to be originating from inside the walls. Turning on her lamp and standing up out of bed, Angela begins to investigate as the noises progress in intensity. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to her, her younger sister Deneen is woken up by the sound of someone banging on the outside of her closed bedroom door. Calling out to whoever was there, she is met with the reply of silence. Finding this strange to say the least, and confused after being woken up out of a sound sleep, the young girl gets out of bed slowly and apprehensively makes her way towards the door. As she turns the knob and peers through the opening, she soon swings the door open to reveal nothing. Just an empty hallway leading to her sister's room across the way. At the same time, Her sister Angela is still investigating the sounds coming from within the walls of her room. The banging has become more rhythmic, more aggressive. It seems as if someone or something is trying to get her attention. The sounds have been moving around her room, and trying to pinpoint its location, she walks up to the wall beside her dresser and slowly places her ear close to the wall to listen. The banging, instead, has found her. With eyes wide, she steps back from the wall as the mysterious sound continues. Deneen, meanwhile, unable to hear her sister's situation, closes her door and sits back on her bed. And almost as soon as she sits down, the knocking begins again. But this time, it's shaking her entire door. Scared, she rushes to put her head under her covers. As each situation crescendos late into the night, the two poor girls are terrified, and needless to say, they don't end up getting much rest. The activity seems to cease at dawn. The following morning, as their mom serves them breakfast, she notices that her two girls look exhausted. Asking what was going on with them, she is soon met with a series of questions, such as, was she the one knocking on the walls or on their doors? Was she walking all around the house? And did she do these things all night long? Unsure of what to make of this, Jeanette hadn't heard anything throughout the night. She chalks it up to the girls dealing with the emotions of everything, moving homes, and experiencing a new environment. She hoped that with due time, they would warm up to the house, and all would be well. The girls don't fully express their fear for lack of belief from their mom. So for this morning, they continue to eat their breakfast together and try to move on to another topic. As the girls go about their day, Jen would go upstairs to her girls' rooms and investigate, but would uncover nothing out of the ordinary. The renovations would continue, and soon the firemen would find themselves within the basement of the home, described as unique, with lots of debris. They demolish old boards and clear things out. As work toils on, the girls examine the backyard. They've never seen an area so big, and although it's freezing outside, they've opted to explore. However, they began to discover some strange things about their new playground. They first noticed strange symbols carved into numerous trees on the property. Unsure of what to make of this, as kids do, they use their imaginations. They decide that they want to design a map to help them hide things. They will use these stars, as they call them, as markers on their map. The two continue to explore and soon make another, even stranger discovery. What appears to be several chipped bones tied together with a lace-like material is dangling from a low-hanging branch of one of the trees. Thinking it was really weird, but again, unsure of what to make of it, the two continue to play. As previous items, debris, and old demolition waste is removed from the basement, those firefighters volunteering soon make a discovery of their own. There, underneath the old floorboards, etched into the concrete below, is an inverted pentagram. They soon call Jen to take a look. Curious as to just what it could be, she comes down and sees it for the first time. As she glances at it, she begins to feel sick to her stomach. She instructs the men that she would like it covered back up, that she didn't want the girls to see it. The men would agree, and simply lay new concrete over it. This way, her girls will never even know that it was there. The girls, however, still playing outside in their winter wonderland, soon make yet another discovery. They begin to find several more stars made out of bones upon the ground. Thinking this was part of some game, they soon incorporate them into their play as well. Well, the innocence of a child. Several days later, Jen has returned to work and has left Angela in charge of her younger sister. Angela has also been tasked with cleaning up the house. As she makes her way around, checking off her list, she feels as if she's not alone. She keeps looking over her shoulder, but nothing seems to be there. Turning once again to get back to cleaning, within seconds, she hears an ear-shattering noise. Her eyes shoot to the origin of where she believed the sound had come from, and the poor girl can't believe what she's seeing. The entire kitchen has been flipped upside down. Pans and dishes thrown out of their cabinets. Silverware that was inside the drawer is now all over the place. And not knowing what else to do, she screams and flees. Hours later, Jen, upon arriving home from work, walks into an eerily quiet house. In her own words, "When I walked inside, everything was very quiet. I glanced into the kitchen, and every cabinet, every drawer was emptied. The place looked like it had been ransacked. I called out for Angela, but got no response." Thinking her daughter had had a tantrum of sorts, Jen goes on the hunt for Angela after not receiving a verbal response from her. Running up the stairs, she finds her holding a stuffed animal and staring blankly ahead in her room. When confronted, Angela tells her mother what had happened, and thankfully, Jen believes her. She recognizes the sincerity in her child's eyes and voice. The following day, when both of the children are out, Jen greets a few workers down in the basement who are putting the finishing touches on things. One of them had found something while working. It was several old-looking pieces of paper tied together with some kind of white lace. Handing the papers to Jen, she begins to unfurl the pages. The opening date goes back to the year 1927, the year that the home was originally built. Scouring the pages for more information, from what she gathers, Jen makes out that the person who wrote this diary of sorts seems to be a young girl, perhaps the daughter of someone who had lived at the house in the past. As she continues to read, she finds out that the girl's name was Christina, and Christina's story took a rather dark turn. Within the diary, she began to describe how her father would hurt animals upon a star in the basement, and the descriptions became darker and more graphic as the pages progressed. Disturbed by what she had just read, Jen decides that no one needs to know about what went on here, that if the things written were true, that the past tenants were very sick people, and she, now living there, wanted to wash her hands of all of their doings, and pretend essentially that nothing happened in this place that her and her children now call home. And who can blame her, except some things don't stay buried. The following day, as Jen is cleaning house, she is suddenly startled by a massive boom that rocks the entire house, Shocked initially by the unexpected blast, she realizes that it's coming from the basement below her. Worried that something had exploded, she apprehensively makes her way to the door and, with flashlight in hand, slowly begins her descension down the stairs. Reaching the concrete floor, she scans the room for any signs of what could potentially have caused the commotion. Stepping forward and peering around, her flashlight suddenly dies. Jen then begins to feel as if the oxygen in the room is being consumed at a rapid pace, and an overwhelming sense of dread begins to overtake her. Running up the stairs as fast as she can and slamming the door behind her, she felt as if she was in the presence of pure evil. Still worried and not knowing if it was something to do with the plumbing or what have you, Jen needs to address the potential cause, but is too frightened to continue, so she lays it on the back burner, so to speak. Later that night, after she's fed the family dinner, Jen is busy cleaning up, while Angela is in her room and Deneen is taking a shower. Angela, who had been sitting on her bed and reading a magazine, suddenly begins to hear the faintest of whispers. It sounds like multiple people whispering at once from a distance. Perplexed, the child gets up and attempts to seek the origin of where these mysterious whispers are coming from. As she steps towards her door, the whispers grow louder, to the point to where some discernment is possible. The whispering seems to be a back and forth conversation amongst two people, but in a very secretive manner. Sounding like it's just outside of her door, Angela throws the door open, only to reveal nothing but the hallway. And as she does this, the whispers simultaneously cease. Perplexed further, she closes the door and begins to head back to her bed, but the whispers start again. Heading back towards the door, she listens in on the two again, and this time she begins to hear the name of her sister mentioned in this secretive conversation. Meanwhile, as Angela is having her own experience, Deneen, who is showering, began to have her own experience as well, feeling as if she was being watched, but trying to shake the feeling off. She tries to finish her shower, but hearing the bathroom door creak open puts the poor girl on edge. Calling out of the steam-tinted glass, asking if it was her mother or Angela who had entered the bathroom, she is soon met with something horrifying. Although blurred by the steam on the glass, she sees the silhouette of a large creature. This thing appeared to have pointed ears and grotesque features. The scared young woman is reduced to terror in the corner of the shower, screaming for her mother. Across the hallway upstairs, Angela, who had overheard what sounded like two people whispering about her sister, pulls the door open when she hears her sister's cries and rushes towards the bathroom. At the same time, Jen also runs upstairs, startled by the cries of her daughter. They try to open the bathroom door, but it won't budge. It's seemingly locked from the other side. As the women frantically try to get inside to save Deneen, she continues to scream for them as this creature presses its face and hand against the glass, unveiling black, rotting skin, yellow eyes, and sharp teeth. Finally, the door opens, as if the unseen hands keeping it closed vanished. Rushing inside to assist the poor girl, they find her shaking, with the shower still running. Turning off the water and placing a towel on her, Jane quickly gets all of them out of the bathroom. But now, as they stand in the hallway, all of the doors within the home that were open close on their own. Simultaneously, a dark, demonic chanting begins to fill the house. As it grows louder and more oppressive, as if some abomination from their worst nightmare was inching ever closer, the fear amongst them exponentially grows. Running to Jen's bedroom, opening the door, and rushing inside before closing the door behind them to barricade themselves from whatever was approaching, Jen holds the door shut in case whatever this thing is tries to come inside. With all three of them in hysterical tears, they begin to cry for their father, Jen's husband, their slain protector. Something begins to slam into the door, trying to break it down. As the noise outside intensifies, all three of them are desperately calling out for Curtis. Although they don't feel his presence, just as quickly as it had begun, the evil outside of the door and all of its chaos abruptly stop. The following day, desperate to talk to someone, but feeling like she'd be judged for being crazy, Jen contemplates who she can confide in. A longtime friend of her husband, named Tony, had been there for her and the girls since everything had happened. If anyone was going to believe her, it would be him. So, she gives him a call, and within a half hour, he arrives at the house. After sitting down together at the kitchen table, Jen explains everything to him, from the discovery of the pentagram in the basement to what they had been experiencing, and especially the horror that had taken place just the night before. After hearing Jen's synopsis, Tony decides to go into the basement to take a look around. After guiding him to the door, Jen refuses to go down with him. So after being handed a flashlight, Tony descends the stairs alone. In his own words, he didn't fear much in life, but while in the basement, he couldn't help but get the feeling that something was watching him, as if there was an oppressive atmosphere of sorts. He had trouble breathing and wanted to get out of there as soon as he could. Suddenly, as he walks around, he is spooked by the sound of a door rattling. As he approaches the door, the rattling continues, further unnerving Tony. Not wanting to delay the inevitable, he decides to throw the door open, and when he does, he reveals an empty room. There is absolutely nothing physically there. Already freaked out, he steps outside of the small room that the door concealed, and the moment that he gets outside of the doorway, the door itself slams shut. It was with this extra action that Tony decides it's time for him to get the hell out of there. Tony, who had worked over 25 years as a corrections officer, truly feared very little, but what he had experienced down in that basement that day rattled him to the core. He explains what happened to Jen, but decides to leave shortly after the experience. Moving forward to try and ease one another, while someone was showering, they decided to post someone outside of the door to keep the other company in case anything else happened. And interestingly, I've had to do the same thing in one of the homes that I lived in that was haunted. But that's a story for another day. But just so you know, I know exactly how they felt. With all of their money tied up in the house, Jen is desperate to try and find some kind of solution. Not a very religious person, but going on what she knew, she decides to call the Catholic Church for help. The following day, a priest arrives to assess the situation, conduct a blessing for the family. He not only agrees that there is something evil within the home, but strategizes with Jen on how to try and get rid of whatever this thing was. He conducts a blessing of the home, but also believes that it's important for Jen to find her inner faith and conduct blessings on a regular basis herself. So, he provides her with gallons worth of holy water, since the property is rather large, in which she places into spray bottles to try and cover every square inch of the home during these blessings. One night, after conducting her blessing, Angela, who had become fairly withdrawn given the stress and trauma of the situation she found herself in, went outside to the swing set they had in their backyard. With it being nighttime, Jen decides to keep an eye on her using the cameras that she had previously installed. As Angela contemplates life and swings by herself, it soon becomes apparent that she is not alone. Jen, who was occasionally looking up at the laptop screen where the cameras were being monitored, soon sees something strange. Surrounding Angela, out of nowhere, were several dark, hooded figures. Jen, whose heart had felt as if it was going to explode, rushes as fast as she can towards the back door and towards her daughter's location. Angela, who was unaware of the figures her mother had seen, had been keeping a steady, normal pace on the swing set, when suddenly she is thrust out of her seat at a furious pace, causing her to smack the snow-packed ground incredibly hard. Upon impact, she hears a horrendous crack. Crying out in pain and for her mother, Angela is greeted by Jen, who begins to throw holy water all around where the two are, screaming and cursing at the figures who had hurt her daughter. Scrambling to get her to their vehicle as fast as she can, Jen then drives her immediately to the hospital. Upon arrival and examination, they discover that her foot and ankle are shattered. The following day, after returning from the hospital, Angela now wears a boot on her leg and is forced to stay in bed, further isolating her and keeping her within the confines of the house. Things seem to be relatively okay during the day, but when the sun goes down, the home begins to come alive. One night, incapacitated in her room, and with Jen out running errands with her sister, Jen is alone on her bed. It's lightly snowing outside, and the moonlight is peeking through her blinds. She begins to hear a faint knocking noise originating from her closet. Looking over, she notices her mirror looks strange, almost liquid. She then sees something that strikes absolute fear into her soul. A charred, black, clawed hand begins emerging from her mirror, slowly and menacingly coming out more and more. Beginning to scream, Angela does the only thing that she can do, because she can't physically run away. Not only is her foot broken, but the mirror is right in front of her door. She quickly throws herself onto the floor and rolls underneath her bed, pinning herself as far back against the wall as she possibly can. The smell of decay fills the entire room as a creature slowly comes out of the mirror. From Angela's perspective, All she can see now is the gnarled feet of this entity. As it steps towards the bed, Angela, grasping the home phone, frantically begins to dial her mother's number. On the other end, Jen picks up. She had been at the grocery store, but upon hearing her daughter's screams, she leaves everything and immediately rushes towards the house. But she is 45 minutes away, pleading with her daughter to pray as she speeds on the slick roads, desperately trying to get home. She then hears a horrendous scream, something unearthly, unlike anything she had ever heard before on the other end. And then the phone call drops. Angela, who had been uttering Hail Mary while on the phone with her mother, was suddenly met face to face with a demon. After rushing home as fast as she could, Jen opens the door to a dark and silent house. All the lights are off, and she doesn't hear anyone or anything. Running up the stairs to Angela's room, she doesn't see her. With tears streaming down her face, she fears that the worst has happened, that whatever this horror was had hurt her daughter. She then hears the faintest whimper coming from underneath the bed. It's Angela. She's so weak and feeble that Jen has to drag her out from underneath the bed. Relocating the girls to her room, Jen then searches for help online. She knows that her and the girls deserve a future, and at this rate, one of them may end up hurt again, or worse. She discovers the number of a paranormal investigator by the name of Liz. Calling the number out of desperation at approximately 3 a.m. at this point. Surprisingly, Liz picks up on the other end. After hearing Jen's harrowing story, she decides that she wants to help her and her family. Having researched the paranormal for over 15 years, she believes that she must conduct a cleansing of the home. So within several hours, shortly after daybreak, Liz arrives, accompanied by her friend and colleague, a woman who is a psychic medium by the name of Dawn Jolie. As soon as the ladies greet Jen at her door and step inside, Dawn begins to receive flashes of the past. She quickly believes that cults conducted many rituals within the home, specifically in the basement, information that she had not been given ahead of time. She believes that these dark cults communicated with and purposefully conjured demonic entities, that the recent renovations had disturbed all the energy within the home. And on a side note, ironically, I also have experienced this as far as renovations disturbing any energy that can be within a home. But again, I'll share this at another time. After discussing what she believed to have happened within the house, the ladies decide to lay a circle of salt around the property, the idea being that it forms a barrier of sorts that no spirit can cross in or out of. To Jen, this was the beginning of the final showdown with these malevolent forces. After laying the circle whilst praying, the three head back inside, where they light several bundles of sage. The three of them then, room by room, bless and cleanse, allowing the sage smoke to fill the air. Slowly but surely, they do this for the entire house until they ultimately reach the basement, the apparent epicenter and the origin of the demonic activity. Together, they descend the stairs, their chants of prayer filling the sage-saturated air. Continuing throughout the basement, they begin to hear what Jen and the children had previously heard, the loud chants, something in a language that they couldn't understand, and with each flick of holy water and prayer cast, they soon also began to hear screams accompanying the chanting, and the whole episode slowly is reaching a crescendo. They finally approached the last space yet to be cleansed, the small room concealed by a door. The very same room that Tony had had his experience in. The door once again begins to violently shake. Wanting to finally end this, Jen approaches the door and throws it open, allowing the sage smoke to infiltrate the last remaining air of the home, while the three women prayed and flicked holy water into the space. Suddenly, flames erupted from the floor, revealing a screaming, charred, demonic figure within, but only for the briefest of moments. Almost as soon as the screams were finished leaving the women's mouths upon the sight of this creature, the fire would extinguish, and this long battle with the demonic would finally be over. The cleansing conducted by Liz and Dawn was indeed successful. Jen and her daughter still live in the home to this day. It just goes to show that evil forces that dwell just beyond the veil of this world have nothing but contempt for us. No tragedy, no sorrow can be grounds to be left alone, but rather they use these as exploits, ways to weaken, attack, and consume those who are the most vulnerable. This family banded together and were able to overcome the terror of the demonic, and for that, I commend them. It just goes to show that love truly does conquer hate.